Imagine for a second, right, that you are just walking down a crowded city street. You're looking at the world around you.
Just a typical morning commute.
Yeah, exactly. You look at your boss, you look at your partner, you look at yourself in the mirror, and suddenly, just out of nowhere, everything shifts.
The whole perspective changes.
Right. It is as if you are literally looking at the source code of human behavior, just scrolling right behind everyone's eyes, like in the Matrix.
I love that visual.
You see the hidden gears turning, the secret motivations, these invisible strings pulling every single person you interact with. That is the exact feeling, the absolute superpower that we are chasing today.
It is a profound shift in how you view the world.
Yeah.
Honestly, once you begin to read that code, you realize that what people say and what they actually intend are often two entirely different realities.
Oh, completely.
And you truly cannot unsee it once you learn it.
And that's exactly the mission of this 4-part deep dive. We are plunging headfirst into this monumental stack of notes on human behavior.
A very heavy stack of notes.
So heavy. We are decoding the deepest, most primal forces that drive absolutely everything we humans do. We are focusing today just on the beginning, the introduction through chapter 4.
Right, laying the foundation.
Exactly. We are going to examine the machinery beneath the surface. And just so you know, this is not some dry psychology lecture. This is a high-velocity sprint into the subconscious.
Fasten your seatbelts, basically.
Yeah. And to kick this off, there is this brilliant premise introduced right at the start of our sources. It's from the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
A classic.
Right. It is the concept of the mineralogist. So here's the idea. When you encounter stupidity or meanness or just incredibly toxic behavior in your life, your default reaction is probably to get angry.
Right,
And
of course.
yeah.
You take it personally. Your heart rate spikes. You get defensive.
Exactly. But Schopenhauer says, stop. Treat that behavior like a fascinating new rock you just dug up out of the dirt.
I mean, think about what a mineralogist actually does out in the field.
Yeah.
They don't get angry at a piece of quartz because it isn't a diamond.
Right. That would be ridiculous.
Right. They don't yell at a rock for being too jagged. They pick it up. They examine its cleavage, its hardness, its luster, and they just categorize it.
They just observe it.
Exactly. They observe it objectively as a natural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer is suggesting we apply that exact same emotional detachment to human beings.
Which is so hard to do.
It is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But the core thesis here is that we are, quite frankly, strangers to ourselves.
Oh, wow.
We are driven by what the sources describe as a little demon of unconscious impulses.
A little demon?
Yes. We walk around believing we are consciously making these highly rational decisions, but this little demon is actually sitting in the control rooms, pulling the levers, operating entirely independently of our willpower, and pushing us into these repetitive, often really self-destructive patterns.
So today our goal is to drag that little demon right out of the shadows.
Into the light.
Exactly. But to really get a look at that demon, we have to start by taking that mineralogist's magnifying glass and turning it inward. We have to look directly at our own internal machinery.
Right. The law of irrationality.
Yes. Because if we want to understand human irrationality, we have to acknowledge that this machinery inside our heads, it is not some clean, modern tech campus with smooth algorithms.
Not at all.
It is a chaotic, sparking, heavy metal factory assembly line of emotions. It is loud, it is messy, and it constantly infects our thinking.
We all walk around imagining we are rational creatures seeking objective truth.
Right.
But that might literally be the single greatest illusion of the human condition.
Why is that? I mean, why are we so blind to it?
Well, it is an illusion born out of evolutionary necessity. We have to understand that for millions of years, human nature fundamentally has not changed.
Not a bit.
We like to think we are so advanced, so logical, but the reality is that all our modern technology, social media, our entire digital landscape, it hasn't evolved our underlying neurobiology at all.
It's just a megaphone.
Exactly. It is simply a digital megaphone for our ancient tribal primate brains.
So we're basically just monkeys with smartphones.
Pretty much. The exact same emotional wiring that kept us alive on the savannah EQ. Scanning for threats, forming in-groups to survive that, is what drives your coworker to sabotage your project out of status anxiety.
Wow.
or it's what drives you to compulsively check your phone for social validation.
So we are wearing business casual, but under the hood, we are running on Paleolithic software.
Perfectly said.
And there's no better way to observe how this Paleolithic software completely overrides rational thought than by looking at a historical petri dish, a place where it destroyed an entire civilization.
This is a fascinating example.
I really want to set a cinematic scene for you here. Close your eyes and picture this. It is 432 BC. We are in ancient Athens,
The Golden Age?
the pinnacle of civilization, wealth, art, and democratic power. But right now, the Athenian assembly, which is this massive roaring mob of 10,000 men crowded onto the rocky outcrop of the Pnyx Hill, they are in an absolute panic.
They were facing an ultimatum.
Right. From their bitter rivals, Sparta, it is the ultimate clash of superpowers. Athens is the incredibly wealthy, progressive sea power. Sparta is the brutal, militaristic, deeply conservative land power.
And the crowd is just losing it.
The hawks in the crowd are screaming for war. The doves are terrified, begging for peace. The emotions are at a boiling point. The air in that assembly is practically vibrating with anxiety, aggression, and raw fear.
It is the absolute perfect storm for irrationality to take the helm. In a state of collective panic, the little demon of the mob feeds on itself.
It's contagious.
Highly contagious. The biological imperative to act, to strike out, to either fight or flee it, completely overwhelms the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning.
Exactly. And into this roaring, panicked mob steps Pericles. He is the elder statesman.
Legendary figure.
And the fascinating thing about Pericles is that, unlike every other dramatic, glory-seeking politician in Athens who just wants to lead a glorious cavalry charge to appease the mob, Pericles is totally restrained.
He's the outlier.
He is logical. The sources actually describe him as basically the human embodiment of the goddess Athena, the deity of practical wisdom, strategy, and rationality.
Yeah.
He steps up to the podium and proposes this brilliant, completely counterintuitive strategy. He tells the mob, "Let the Spartans come. Let them march right up to our walls and burn our farms."
Which sounds crazy to them.
Oh, they hate it. But he says, "We will hide behind our massive city fortifications. We will not fight them on land," which is exactly what they want us to do because they are invincible on land.
Right. You don't fight a land war with Sparta.
Exactly. Instead, he says, we will use our unmatched navy to supply ourselves from the sea and harass their coastal allies until they simply run out of money, resources, and patience.
It is cold. It is calculated.
Right.
And it is brilliant because it removes ego from the equation.
Yes.
And, crucially, it was working. Pericles had this unique psychological architecture to act as a buffer against the raw, irrational emotions of the mob.
He had what the sources call an inner Athena.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is vital to note that Pericles didn't lack emotion.
Right, he wasn't a robot.
No, he loved Athens deeply, and he was fiercely ambitious. But he did not let those emotions dictate his strategy. He observed his own fear and the fear of his citizens, and he maintained a space between the stimulus of the Spartan threat and his strategic response.
But then, history delivers a massive, tragic twist.
Not player.
The ultimate plot twist. Because everyone is crammed inside the city walls, living in incredibly dense, unsanitary conditions, a horrific plague hits Athens.
It was devastating.
It spreads like wildfire through the cramped population. It wipes out a third of the city, men, women, children, soldiers. And tragically, Pericles himself catches the plague and dies.
A massive loss.
And this is where the historical record gets absolutely insane to read, because the second Pericles is gone, the second that anchor rationality is removed, Athens completely loses its collective mind.
The emotional pendulum of the city just swings violently.
It's whiplash.
The restraint that Pericles had so carefully instilled vanishes entirely. The Athenians, traumatized by the plague and exhausted by the war, become consumed by a toxic cocktail of bitterness, greed, and an absolute blinding hubris.
Without the inner Athena to guide them, the little demon takes full control of the state apparatus.
Yes. They become completely unhinged.
They really do. They decide to attack this tiny neutral island called Melos simply because Melos refuses to pay them tribute.
Just out of spite.
Yeah, and when the island eventually surrenders, the Athenians vote to massacre every single adult man and sell all the women and children into slavery.
Horrific.
It is an act of pure emotional bloodlust. Pericles never would have allowed that. It served zero strategic purpose and only made their enemies hate them more.
It was entirely driven by the little demon.
But wait, it gets so much worse. Driven by pure greed and this delusion of invincibility, they decide to launch the Syracuse expedition.
The tipping point.
They vote to send this massive, glittering, incredibly expensive naval armada all the way to conquer Sicily. Why? Just because they are dreaming of endless riches and expanding their empire to impossible borders.
And the mechanism of their irrationality is perfectly displayed in how they handled dissent during this.
Oh, the Nizia story.
Right. Nicias, one of their most experienced commanders, actually tries to warn them. He stands before the assembly and tries to point out the logical flaws, the massive logistical risks of fighting a war so far from home while still fighting Sparta.
He's trying to be the new Pericles.
He tries. He tells them they need a fundamentally larger force if they even want a fraction of a chance of succeeding. He is using logic to try and cool their fever.
But it doesn't work.
Instead of sobering them up, his logical warning completely backfires. The Athenians, swept up in conviction bias, simply vote to send an even bigger armada.
They double down.
They double down on the irrationality because they are drunk on the vision of victory. They don't want to hear the truth. They want to protect their fantasy.
Drunk is the perfect word. I picture this scene described in historical accounts, right? A barber in the port of Piraeus is casually cutting hair, and he hears a rumor from a passing merchant that the entire armada in Sicily, every single ship, almost every single man, has been completely wiped out.
A total slaughter.
The rumor spreads, the sheer panic sets in, and eventually the horrifying truth is confirmed. The expedition is a catastrophic failure. Athens is destroyed. They lose their empire, their wealth, their golden age, all because they couldn't control their own emotions.
It's a tragedy of irrationality.
So, looking at this through the mineralogist's lens, what does this all mean for us? Every single Athenian who voted to destroy their own empire, who cheered to send that second massive fleet they thought they were being completely 100% rational in the moment.
And that is the very core of the law of irrationality. What Pericles understood and what we must understand about our own neurobiology is the pleasure principle in thinking.
The pleasure principle.
Yes. We assume that when we engage in thought, our brain is acting like a supercomputer, just searching for the objective truth.
Right.
We are not. The brain is an organ designed for survival and energy conservation. And cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting ideas, or realizing you are wrong, actually requires a massive amount of metabolic energy.
It literally hurts to be wrong.
It induces physical, psychological pain.
Yeah.
Therefore, the brain is actually searching for ideas that soothe our egos, that release tension, that make us feel superior or safe.
We want the comfort of certainty.
Exactly. We don't want the truth.
Let me give you a visceral analogy to explain how this gravity of comfort actually works. Imagine your mind is a 3D topographical mountain.
Okay, a mountain.
You have these high, sharp peaks of objective truth, and you have these really deep, comfortable, sheltered valleys. The valleys represent your pre-existing beliefs, the things you already desperately want to be true about yourself, your politics, or your relationships.
Right, the comfortable zones.
Now, drop a marble at the top of that mountain. That marble represents a new thought or a new piece of complex information. Because of the gravity of your emotions, your inherent biases, that marble is practically never going to stay balanced on the sharp peak of objective truth.
It's too precarious.
Exactly. You don't even feel the invisible pull, but gravity inevitably drags that thought rolling down, down, down until it settles right into the deepest, coziest valley of what you already believe.
Yeah, that is an excellent mechanical visualization of cognitive bias. And those valleys, that emotional gravity, they take the form of specific, deeply ingrained neurological patterns.
Like confirmation bias.
Exactly. Take confirmation bias. When we look at a complex situation, our brain acts like a selective filter. We don't passively receive information. We actively scan for data that confirms our pre-existing valley.
Like when you buy a red car and suddenly you only see red cars.
Yes. And we instantly, unconsciously discard data that contradicts it. We magically only see the evidence that supports our rosy scenario.
It's wild. And then you have the conviction bias.
Oh, that one is dangerous.
This is the deeply flawed heuristic that assumes if we feel strongly about something, if we argue it with enough passion and volume, it must be true. We confuse the intensity of our emotion with the validity of our argument.
Which is exactly what the Athenian mob did when they yelled over Nicias.
Yes. They just screamed louder, so they must be right. And then there is the blame bias. This is the valley where nothing is ever our fault.
Never.
If a project fails or a relationship ends, Our brain immediately constructs a narrative where our mistakes were the result of bad luck or other people's incompetence, never our own fundamental flaws.
It is a defense mechanism to keep the self-esteem from collapsing.
Right. But out of all of them, the sources point to the superiority bias as the most insidious valley on the mountain.
The superiority bias is the ultimate optical illusion of the human mind. It is the belief that while other people might be driven by these biases, we ourselves are uniquely rational, ethical, and objective.
Yes. It's the feeling you get when you listen to the story of Athens and say, wow, those ancient people sure were crazy. I am so glad I am a highly rational, modern person who would never make a mistake like that.
Exactly. The sources literally state that we cannot see our own faults, only the glaring faults of others.
Which is so funny and so true.
Precisely. Because if everyone were as rational, ethical, and superior as they inherently believe themselves to be, the world would be a frictionless utopia.
And it definitely isn't.
Far from it.
Yeah.
The reality we must accept is that rationality is not a natural human state. It does not come pre-installed in the factory settings of the brain. It is an unnatural power, a cognitive override that has to be actively, painstakingly cultivated.
You have to build your own inner Athena.
You do.
But hold on, if our brains are wired to avoid the physical pain of cognitive dissonance, and we naturally default to the pleasure principle just to survive the sheer overwhelming volume of information in the world, how do we actually cultivate this inner Athena without just pretending we don't have emotions?
Right.
Like, how do you overcome millions of years of evolutionary gravity?
That is the crucial distinction. Cultivating rationality is not about transcending emotion or becoming a cold, unfeeling robot.
Okay.
Remember, Pericles felt deep emotion. Rationality is simply the heightened awareness of the emotion. It is the deliberate practice of increasing your reaction time.
Creating gap.
Exactly. When you feel that sudden surge of anger or that intoxicating rush of excitement over a new idea, you must train yourself to pause. You force a wedge of time between the stimulus and your response.
You have to catch the marble before it rolls down the hill.
Beautifully put. You observe the emotion bubbling up rather than immediately allowing it to dictate your physical actions. And going back to the mineralogist concept, you practice seeing people as neutral facts of nature.
Right, right.
When someone acts irrationally or aggressively towards you, you don't project your own moral outrage onto them. You view them as a comet or a plant.
I love the houseplant analogy. They're just a chaotic, sometimes destructive houseplant acting out its natural biological imperatives.
It really removes the sting of personal insult.
It does. But if irrationality is the gravity pulling our thoughts down the mountain and blinding us to objective reality, it also profoundly blinds us to the reality of other people.
Which is the perfect transition.
Right, because this explains why we naturally default to treating people not as autonomous human beings, but as tools for our own ego.
Yeah.
This brings us to the law of narcissism.
Yes.
And we are talking about how to transform self-love into genuine empathy.
This is where we must confront the spectrum of self-absorption. To understand how humans connect or tragically fail to connect, we must deeply examine the mechanics of how we view our own identity in relation to the external world.
Here is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable, because the reality is you are a narcissist. I'm a narcissist. We all are.
We all exist on that spectrum.
And the sources frame this using a brilliant mechanical concept, the self-esteem thermostat.
It's a great metaphor.
It fundamentally reframes how we think about self-absorption. This thermostat is a psychological mechanism that develops between the ages of 2 and 5.
Very early on.
In a healthy, functional psychological development, as a toddler slowly realizes they are a separate entity from their mother or primary caregiver, they begin to build an internal regulatory system.
Like learning to walk emotionally.
Yes. They learn how to soothe themselves when they are upset, how to validate their own worth when they fail at a task. They build a cohesive, resilient sense of self. That internal structure is the thermostat.
It regulates the temperature.
It regulates their self-esteem so it doesn't plummet into depression when criticized or run dangerously hot into delusions of grandeur when praised.
But the deep narcissist never successfully builds that internal thermostat.
Never.
Somewhere in those formative years, the construction process is interrupted. It could be due to severe abandonment or neglect, where the child is forced to fend for themselves emotionally before they're actually capable.
The exact opposite, right.
Paradoxically, yes. It can be caused by enmeshment, where a hyper-attentive parent suffocates the child, constantly anticipating their needs and never allowing the child to develop their own internal coping mechanisms.
They never have to regulate their own temperature because the parent is doing it for them.
Whatever the specific developmental trauma is, the result is the exact same. The internal thermostat is entirely missing.
So instead of the cliche idea of an astronaut floating in space with a leaky suit, let's look at this biologically. A deep narcissist is essentially a psychological parasite that lacks its own internal temperature regulation.
It's a stark way to put it.
But it's true. Because they cannot generate their own emotional warmth or self-worth, they are forced to physically and emotionally latch on to a host other people to siphon their energy.
They need it to survive.
They have to violently suck in the attention, the validation, the emotional reactions of everyone around them just to maintain their baseline psychological survival.
Exactly. Because without that internal thermostat, other people cease to be fully realized, independent human beings with their own inner lives.
They become objects.
To the deep narcissist, other people become what the psychological literature terms self-objects. A deep narcissist views you the exact same way you view your arm or your leg.
Oh, wow.
You do not have independent agency. You exist merely as an instrument to feed them attention and regulate their non-existent self-esteem.
And if you stop feeding them,
If you attempt to exert your independence, or if you challenge them, they have no internal defense mechanism to absorb the critique. Therefore, they react with explosive, righteous rage, which is called narcissistic injury, because you are fundamentally threatening their psychological survival.
But there is a fascinating, almost terrifying paradox here. We tend to think of deep narcissists as just outwardly arrogant, annoying, or pathetic people who constantly talk about themselves, right?
The stereotype.
But the sources highlight a much more dangerous archetype, the complete control narcissist. And they use the historical example of Joseph Stalin.
A prime example.
Now, Stalin was one of the most paranoid, murderous dictators in human history, responsible for the deaths of millions. But the historical accounts of him early in his career, before he consolidated absolute power, describe him as incredibly charming.
He was very well liked.
People genuinely loved him. How could someone who is essentially an emotional parasite lacking a thermostat be so utterly captivating to the people around him?
Because of a deeply misunderstood phenomenon we can call dark empathy.
Dark empathy.
Yes. Deep narcissists are often hypersensitive to the emotional states of others, not out of compassion, but out of necessity.
It's a survival tool.
Their survival depends entirely on reading the room to extract the validation they need. Stalin, particularly in his early political ascent, would weaponize this sensitivity.
How so?
When he was in the Bolshevik inner circle, he wouldn't dominate the conversation. He would pace the room quietly, puffing on his pipe, and listen to his lieutenants with a laser-like piercing intensity.
Making them feel special.
He would pull an arm around them, look them dead in the eye, use the familiar "you" in Russian, and make them feel as if they were the single most important person in the revolution. But he wasn't doing this to build a genuine emotional connection.
No, he was mapping them.
He was running a psychological scan.
Exactly. He was using his hypersensitivity like a radar system to map out their deepest insecurities, their secret doubts, their vanities, and their hidden resentments.
And once he had that map,
Once he had comprehensively mapped their psychological vulnerabilities, he could control them completely. He knew exactly what flattery to use to buy their loyalty and exactly what fear to trigger to keep them paralyzed.
is empathy entirely weaponized for manipulation and extraction.
That is bone-chilling. Weaponized empathy. He basically picks the lock of your psyche just to rob you.
It is.
But the sources contrast Stalin's dark void with the healthy narcissist, and the example they use is Sir Ernest Shackleton, the legendary polar explorer.
A completely different end of the spectrum.
Talk about the ultimate stress test for a leader's character. It is 1915. His ship, the Endurance, is trapped in the Weddell Sea.
Surrounded by ice.
The incredibly thick Antarctic ice literally crushes the timber of the ship to splinters, and it sinks. Shackleton and his crew of 27 men are stranded on a shifting, freezing wasteland of sea ice. They are completely cut off from the entire world with no radio, facing almost certain death as the dark Antarctic winter sets in.
A waking nightmare.
Now, a deep narcissist under that level of existential threat would have completely crumbled. Their thermostat would have shattered. They would have blamed the crew, hoarded the rations, or demanded everyone cater to their panic.
Because they couldn't handle the temperature drop.
Exactly. What did Shackleton do?
Shackleton represents the absolute pinnacle of the healthy narcissist. He possessed a very strong, highly resilient sense of self, a highly functional, robust internal thermostat.
So he didn't freeze.
He didn't. So when the crisis hit, he didn't plummet inward into panic or despair. Because his own self-worth was secure, he was able to take his natural self-love and turn it entirely outward toward his men.
He radiated the heat.
Exactly. He became a master mood reader. He didn't just manage the logistics of survival, he systematically managed the psychological states of his crew. He observed them constantly.
Like Stalin did, but for a different reason.
Yes. He knew exactly who was losing hope, who was getting angry, who needed to be paired with an optimist, and who needed extra duties to distract them from their fear. He would actively infect them with his own manufactured confidence and hope. He mirrored their emotional needs to ensure their collective survival.
He used the exact same empathic radar as Stalin, but to save lives instead of destroying them. He was projecting warmth to keep them alive instead of siphoning it.
And the sources argue that we are not just born with this ability or without it. We can actually train it. We can build what they call the empathic muscle. We can learn to physically mirror people, subtly crossing our legs the way they do, matching the cadence of their breathing, softening our voice to match theirs.
Just getting in sync with them.
Exactly. And most importantly, we have to consciously shut off our own relentless, self-obsessed internal monologue and genuinely try to adopt their value system for a moment.
It is a profound, active shift in consciousness. Because we are naturally biologically self-absorbed, right? We are constantly locked in our own internal dialogue about our anxieties and our desires.
Always thinking about what we're going to say next.
Yes. Training the empathic muscle requires a deliberate, conscious effort to stop formulating your next response while the other person is talking and to fully absorb their reality.
When you match their physical posture and their breathing, you trigger mirror neurons in your own brain that allow you to literally feel a fraction of their emotional state. It is a physical sensation of connection.
But hold on, I have to push back here.
Okay, go ahead.
If Stalin used empathy to map insecurities and manipulate, and Shackleton used it to monitor morale and lead, the actual physical behavior of intensive listening and mirroring is completely identical.
That's true.
If we tell the listener to go out and match people's breathing and intensely analyze their desires to build rapport, how are they supposed to tell the difference between being a highly effective sociopath and a saint in real time?
That is the essential ethical boundary line of this entire concept. The line between manipulation and genuine empathy is defined entirely by the core intent and the internal ego state of the practitioner.
The intent.
Exactly. Stalin's intent was total control and extraction. He fundamentally viewed his lieutenants as self-objects, mere tools to consolidate his own power. The mirroring was nothing more than a tactical data-gathering exercise.
Right.
Shackleton's intent, however, was mutual survival and genuine human connection. When you exercise true empathy, you aren't just faking a physical posture to attract a favor or make a sale. You are temporarily, voluntarily suspending your own ego to truly understand the other person's value system and ease their burden.
So it's about checking your ego.
To use your analogy, it is the difference between picking a lock to rob a house and using a key because you were invited inside to help clean up. The physical action of turning the tumbler might look mechanically similar, but the internal reality and the long-term consequence for the relationship are exact opposites.
Suspending the ego versus feeding the ego, that clears it up completely. And this idea of altering our physical behavior to project empathy and connect with others naturally transitions us into a broader, somewhat uncomfortable reality.
Which is?
Human interaction is, to a massive extent, a giant theatrical performance.
Oh, absolutely.
If we can consciously mirror people, it means we are actively crafting our presentation. This leads us to the law of role-playing. We are moving from the internal core of our narcissistic thermostat to the external masks we wear every single day.
We must accept that Shakespeare was entirely literal when he said all the world is a stage.
Literal.
From our earliest childhood interactions, we are trained actors. We learn through trial and error how to perform. We learn how to cry to get immediate attention, how to smile to get approval from our parents, how to act deferential to teachers to avoid punishment.
We curate a persona for survival and social cohesion.
Yes, but because we are playing these roles constantly every hour of every day, we forget that we are actually acting. We begin to mistake the mask for our true face.
And more dangerously, we assume everyone else is presenting their authentic, unfiltered selves to us.
We take the mask for the reality. We believe the performance is the person.
But the mask always has cracks because the underlying emotions are too powerful to perfectly suppress. And to learn how to spot those cracks, the sources give us the incredible, deeply inspiring story of Milton Erickson.
A fascinating figure.
Erickson became one of the most famous psychiatrists and hypnotherapists of the 20th century, but his superpower for reading people didn't come from reading a textbook in a comfortable university.
No, it came from profound personal tragedy.
When he was just 17 years old, he contracted a severe, life-threatening case of polio. He was entirely paralyzed. He couldn't move his arms, his legs, or his torso. He could only move his eyes and speak with great difficulty.
Unimaginable.
He was confined to a rocking chair in the middle of his family's bustling farmhouse. He was just sitting there, in forced, absolute physical isolation, while life happened around him.
It sounds like a psychological nightmare. But for Erickson, that rocking chair became the ultimate rigorous training ground for human observation.
Because he couldn't do anything else.
Right. Because he couldn't physically participate in the chaotic verbal chatter and the physical play of his siblings, he was forced to become a passive, hypervigilant observer. And sitting in that chair, watching his family interact day after day, he realized a fundamental truth.
What was it?
People communicate on two entirely different, often contradictory channels. There are the words they say, which are highly conscious, heavily filtered, and often deceptive or superficial. And then there is the body language, the micro-expressions, the nonverbal cues.
Which tell the real story.
Exactly. These are largely unconscious and almost always tell the brutal truth.
The sources estimate that over 65% of all human communication is entirely nonverbal. Tone of voice, posture, eye movement, micro-tensions in the face.
A huge percentage.
And yet, because our conscious brains are so obsessed with processing language, we ignore almost all of this rich data stream. But Erickson, stuck in that chair, became a superhuman decoder. He started watching his younger siblings learn to walk. He noticed that you can read a person's entire character and current emotional state just by observing how they move through space.
Yes, he categorized these movements with incredible precision. He noted the heavy, emphatic stomp of someone full of resolve or hidden anger.
Or the loping, fluid, unstructured walk of someone who is lazy or lacking direction.
And most revealingly, the walk put on deliberately to cover a deep insecurity, like the exaggerated, puffed-out, hyper-masculine stride that is desperately trying to project dominance to hide a profound internal weakness or fear.
Or think of the rebellious teenager's nonchalant, dragging shuffle. They're trying so incredibly hard to project to the world that they don't care about anything.
Which ironically proves exactly how desperately much they do care about how they are perceived.
Exactly. Erickson essentially decoded the matrix of human movement. And the sources give us the specific decoding keys to do exactly the same thing in our own lives.
So we can be decoders too.
Let's break these down for the listener. How do we spot the glitching pixels in people's social masks? Let's start with the most common mask of all, the fake smile. How do you mechanically tell the difference between genuine joy and polite deception?
It all comes down to neuromuscular mechanics. A genuine smile, what cognitive scientists call a Duchenne smile, is an involuntary reflex.
It just happens.
Right. It involves the entire face, specifically the orbicularis oculi muscles surrounding the eyes. When you genuinely smile, those muscles contract, causing the skin around the eyes to crinkle the crow's feet. You cannot easily fake that muscle contraction.
So what does a fake smile look like?
A fake smile, which is put on for social politeness or to actively hide hostility, is localized entirely to the lower half of the face, specifically the mouth. It does not reach the eyes.
Dead behind the eyes.
Exactly. Furthermore, a fake smile tends to be asymmetrical, slightly more pronounced on one side of the face than the other, and the timing is off. It appears too quickly and drops off too abruptly, lacking the natural fade of a genuine emotion.
You can just intuitively feel it when a smile is dead behind the eyes. It is an incredibly chilling sensation once you consciously notice the lack of eye crinkling.
It is.
But what about dominance cues? Because in any office or social setting, people are constantly subtly trying to establish who is the alpha in the room without ever actually saying it out loud.
Dominance keys are fascinating because they are specifically designed to be disguised as benign, innocent behavior. This gives the dominant person plausible deniability.
Like what?
For example, chronic lateness.
Yeah.
If someone is consistently showing up 10 minutes late for meetings or dinners with you, they always have a polite excuse, it is rarely just bad time management.
No, it's a power play.
It is a repeated, nonverbal assertion that their time is fundamentally more valuable than yours, and that they are powerful enough that they are not obligated to adhere to your schedule. They're establishing a hierarchy where you wait for them.
Oh, that makes my blood boil. The passive-aggressive power play of making people wait. And then there is the strangest, most manipulative dominance cue the sources mention, which they call the symptom.
Oh, the symptom.
This is wild. Imagine someone is losing a logical argument, or they feel they are losing control of a dynamic in a romantic relationship, and suddenly they have a terrible migraine.
How convenient.
Or they suddenly fall into a vague depression, or an old, mysterious physical illness flares up right at the very moment they are being held accountable.
Yes, the willful, though sometimes semi-unconscious, use of sympathy to gain absolute power. By suddenly becoming the fragile victim, by exhibiting the symptom, they completely change the rules of engagement.
They hijack the situation.
Yes, they force you to drop your logical argument, to cater to their sudden weakness, and to walk on eggshells. If you continue to press your point, you look like a monster attacking a sick person.
Right.
It is an incredibly effective, highly covert way to dominate an interaction and evade all accountability.
It is absolute emotional judo. You are using your own apparent frailty to throw the other person completely off balance.
Precisely.
Okay, let's look at the darkest end of the spectrum. Pure deception. How do you decode the body language of someone who is lying straight to your face, like a professional con artist?
Well, the common misconception is that liars will be nervous, sweaty, fidgety, and actively avoiding eye contact.
Like in the movies.
Right, but master deceivers, think of someone like Bernie Madoff, who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history. They know exactly what you expect a liar to look like, so they consciously do the exact opposite.
To project trustworthiness.
Exactly. They become overly still, they minimize their body movements, they present an extremely serious, competent, almost boring exterior, they maintain solid eye contact, and they will purposefully drown you in numbers, complex charts, and professional jargon to lull your analytical suspicions to sleep.
But the body always betrays the lie. The sources point out this incredible concept of emphasis timing.
Timing is everything.
When you are telling the truth and you are genuinely angry or passionate about a point, your body language, like pounding your fist on the table or jabbing your finger, happens organically. It happens slightly before or exactly on the verbal word you are emphasizing. The brain and the body are synchronized in the emotion.
Right, it's a unified action.
But a deceiver is carrying a massive cognitive load. They are consciously reciting a script while monitoring your reaction, so they say the angry word in the script. And then, a split second later, their brain remembers to add the physical gesture and they pound the fist.
The timing is fundamentally off.
It is exactly like watching a badly dubbed foreign movie. The audio track and the physical track do not sync up.
That slight microsecond delay is the crack in the mask. It reveals that the emotion is contrived, artificially pulled from a mental script, rather than felt organically in the nervous system.
Which is amazing to watch once you know to look for it.
And recognizing these cues, reading this matrix, allows you to engage in what the sources call impression management. Once you realize that everyone is playing a role, you can consciously and strategically sculpt your own persona.
And this is where I find the sources so liberating. There is this pervasive, incredibly popular idea in modern culture right now that we must bring our authentic selves to work, to our relationships, to every interaction.
It's a very common buzzword.
I think that demand for complete authenticity is a massive trap. There is no such thing as pure, unfiltered authenticity in the social world.
I agree completely.
Even the rebellious hipster in the coffee shop, wearing the specific distressed beanie, the vintage band tee, and the ironic tattoos, they are playing a heavily scripted role. They are adhering to a subcultural uniform and a set of behavioral norms just as strictly as a Wall Street banker in a bespoke three-piece suit.
They're both wearing masks. The hipster is just pretending they aren't.
Exactly.
The demand for complete authenticity is not only a trap, it is socially destructive. If you actually expressed every fleeting, irrational emotion, every dark thought, every moment of boredom or petty jealousy you felt throughout the day, society would instantly reject you, and rightfully so.
It'd be unbearable.
Exactly. A persona, which derives from the Latin word for the theatrical masks worn by ancient actors, is a necessary lubricant for civilization. The goal of understanding human behavior is not to rip off everyone's mask and force a terrifying, unfiltered authenticity.
What is the goal then?
The goal is to master your own mask, to learn to control your presence and, equally importantly, your absence. If you are always available, always perfectly predictable, always oversharing your internal state, people grow bored and take you for granted. You must learn the art of selective withdrawal to create an aura of mystery and command respect.
You have to step up and be the director of your own movie, not just an extra stumbling through the background.
Precisely.
But practically speaking, if I am listening to this and I go to a dinner party tonight and I start intensely scrutinizing the asymmetry of everyone's smiles and watching for a split-second delay in their hand gestures and analyzing my boss's breathing patterns, are I just going to look like a paranoid weirdo?
Yes, you are.
Right. So how do you actually gather all this nonverbal intel without making people freeze up and put their masks on even tighter?
That is the paradox of observation. If you are staring at people with the intensity of a predator, their nervous system will detect the threat and they will immediately lock down their physical expressions.
They'll sense you analyzing them.
Exactly. The key to Milton Erickson's superhuman observation was that he appeared completely relaxed, benign, and natural. You don't stare directly at the micro-expressions. You use soft focus and peripheral vision.
Like a magic eye poster.
Exactly. You engage warmly in the conversation, you ask them open-ended questions, and crucially, you get them talking about themselves, which plays directly to their natural narcissism.
Everyone loves talking about themselves.
They do. As they talk about their favorite subject, their ego is stroked, they relax their guard, and they naturally begin to leak the nonverbal cues. You simply observe their relaxed baseline, and then you quietly note the sudden deviations from that baseline when a stressful topic is introduced. It must appear entirely effortless.
It is like being a social ninja. You are gathering vital intelligence while casually offering someone an hors d'oeuvre. But all of this mask reading, all of this careful observation of the performance, leads us to the final, deepest layer of today's exploration. We have traversed the gravity of irrational biases, we have looked into the parasitic nature of the broken narcissistic thermostat, and we have learned to decode the theatrical masks people wear.
The external layers.
Right. But no matter how skilled the actor is, no matter how tightly the persona is strapped to their face, eventually, under the crushing weight of sustained pressure or temptation, the mask inevitably cracks.
And what leaks out is the truth.
What leaks out from those cracks is the absolute unyielding bedrock underneath. We are diving into the law of compulsive behavior and examining the profound concept of human character.
Character is destiny. It is the most fundamental, inescapable truth of human nature. And the sources lay down an absolute, unbreakable mechanical rule for navigating the social world.
Let's hear it.
People never do something just once.
Let that statement fully sink in for a second. People never do something just once.
If someone betrays a business partner, if they sabotage a loyal colleague for a promotion, if they crack under the pressure of a crisis and abandon ship,
Yeah.
they will do it again.
Very good.
They might present to you 1,000 elaborate, perfectly rationalized, deeply emotional excuses for why it happened this one specific time, why it was a unique anomaly, why it wasn't really their fault.
I was just stressed.
Exactly. Do not listen to the words. The words are the mask. Look strictly at the behavioral pattern. They are operating under a deep-seated psychological compulsion that will inevitably repeat itself.
And to understand exactly why it is a compulsion, the sources describe character structurally, almost like a piece of forged metal. A person's character is forged in 3 distinct layers.
Let's break those down.
The bottom layer, the absolute foundation, is genetics. This is your primal neurochemistry. It is an undeniable biological reality that some babies are born highly sensitive to stimuli, some are born naturally aggressive and risk-seeking, and some are born placid and calm.
Right, the factory setting.
You do not choose this foundational wiring. You are baked with it.
The second layer, which sits directly on top of the genetics, is early attachments. These are the deep psychological blueprints formed by your relationship with your parents or primary caregivers in your earliest years, primarily between ages 0 and 4, often before you can even articulate conscious thoughts.
So deeply subconscious.
Yes. Drawing on Bowlby's attachment theory, we must ask, did your caregivers encourage your independence while providing a safe haven? Did they emotionally suffocate you and induce anxiety? Did they inconsistently abandon you, forcing you to develop avoidant defense mechanisms?
They set the template.
This early environment programs your brain's default, unconscious strategy for handling stress, intimacy, and the seeking of love for the rest of your life.
And then the top layer, the visible surface of the metal, is habits. These are the repeated behaviors, the conscious choices, and the coping mechanisms you make as you grow up, which eventually solidify into neural pathways.
The actions you take repeatedly.
And to make this concept truly visceral, Think of character as a sword being forged by a blacksmith. A person with a strong, superior character is like a sword forged from high-carbon steel with immense tensile strength.
You can take a hit.
Exactly. When the heavy hammer of life's stress comes down a job loss, a divorce, a massive failure, they bend under the pressure, they absorb the kinetic shock of the blow, they adapt to the new reality, and they snap back into shape. Most importantly, they learn from the blow and adjust their behavior.
Conversely, a person with a weak character is like a sword cast from brittle, low-quality pig iron. It might look perfectly solid and shiny on the outside when it is sitting untouched on the desk.
When everything is easy.
Right. But when that exact same hammer of stress hits it, it does not bend. It shatters. It fragments into a million pieces. People with brittle character cannot absorb criticism or adversity. They instantly deflect blame onto others, they panic, they lash out, and because they lack the tensile strength to reflect and adapt, they compulsively repeat the exact same disastrous mistakes that invited the hammer blow in the first place.
They shatter into pieces. And this mechanical failure of character brings us to the toxic archetypes. The sources outline specific profiles of these brittle, highly dangerous characters that you absolutely must learn to spot before they drag you down with them.
You have to know what to look for.
Let's really dig into the mechanisms of these archetypes. First up, the relentless rebel.
The relentless rebel is particularly dangerous because at first glance, they are incredibly charismatic and attractive. They present themselves as the cool, anti-authoritarian maverick, the underdog fiercely fighting against a corrupt system or an unfair boss. We are naturally drawn to that defiant adolescent energy.
Right. If you are in a corporate startup, they are the one making hilarious biting jokes about the CEO in the Slack channel, mocking the HR rules, and making you feel like you are both part of a secret elite club of truth tellers. It is intoxicating to be around them.
It feels very inclusive. But then, if you observe them long enough, you realize their rebellion is not based on a principled moral stance against injustice. It is a psychological compulsion rooted in an early childhood resentment of authority figures, often a domineering parent. They fundamentally cannot tolerate anyone else having power over them. And the ultimate proof of this character flaw occurs if you mistakenly elevate them.
What happens?
If you give the relentless rebel a management position or a modicum of genuine authority, they instantly, seamlessly transform into the most petty, micromanaging, tyrannical dictators of all.
Oh, the irony.
They rebelled not because they hated the existence of power, but purely because they hated that they were not the ones wielding it.
So the plucky underdog was just a dormant bully waiting for a title.
Exactly.
Next, let's unpack the sexualizer.
This character archetype views every single human interaction, every friendship, every professional relationship, entirely through the lens of sexual conquest and desirability.
It's all about the chase.
Yes. The psychological mechanism here usually stems from a profound, agonizingly deep-seated sense of worthlessness, often rooted in early childhood neglect, or a failure to build that internal self-esteem thermostat we discussed earlier.
Because the thermostat is broken.
Right. Because they cannot generate their own sense of worth, they use the intense thrill of the chase, the dopamine hit of seduction, and the validation of conquest as a temporary external fix for their shattered ego.
They are actually looking for a human partner to build a life with. They are frantically searching for a mirror to reflect back to them that they are attractive, powerful, and worthy of existing.
It is entirely self-serving.
And the tragedy is that the validation fades almost instantly after the conquest, forcing them to repeat the compulsion indefinitely. And the older they get, as their physical attractiveness wanes, the more desperate, inappropriate, and destructive this pattern becomes to everyone around them.
It becomes very sad.
And finally, perhaps the most hypocritical archetype of all, the easy moralizer.
This is the individual screaming the absolute loudest from the literal pulpit, or leading the outrage mob on social media, demanding absolute purity, ethics, and morality from everyone else. They are the first to relentlessly condemn someone else's minor flaws or missteps.
They are a perpetual, exhausting outrage machine. They appoint themselves the sheriff of the neighborhood committee or the HR department.
Exactly. But to understand them, we must look at the psychological law of repression, heavily influenced by Jungian concepts of the shadow.
The shadow self.
The law dictates that whatever human impulses we violently repress and deny within ourselves do not disappear. They secretly obsess us.
Oh, wow.
The easy moralizer is screaming so aggressively about the darkness in the world because they are secretly, profoundly fascinated and tempted by the very darkness they are condemning. Their moral crusade is a desperate attempt to build an external fortress against their own internal desires.
So it's a projection.
Yes. And when their mask inevitably slips under pressure, they're almost always caught engaging in the exact specific behavior they spent their entire lives preaching against.
It is the aggressively family values politician caught in the motel scandal with a sex worker. It happens with such mechanical regularity you could set your watch by it.
It's clockwork.
The mask is absolute purity, but the bedrock is uncontrollable obsession. And the sources point out the ultimate truth serum for revealing these brittle characters. You don't ask someone if they have strong character, because they will lie.
Obviously.
You do one of two things.
Hmm.
You give them power, or you put them under intense stress.
Abraham Lincoln famously noted this dynamic. He observed that nearly all men can stand adversity and hardship, but if you want to test a man's true character, give him power.
Give him power.
When you grant someone power, you remove the external societal constraints. They no longer have to play the submissive, cooperative role to survive. Without those constraints, the true bedrock of their character bleeds out into their behavior.
And stress does the same thing, right?
Yes. Putting someone under intense, unexpected stress serves the same function. In a sudden crisis, the cognitive load required to manage the situation is so overwhelmingly high that the brain literally does not have the spare processing power to maintain the artificial mask.
The act just drops.
The act drops.
Yeah.
The brittle pig iron shatters while the tensile steel holds its shape.
But looking at this layered cake of character genetics, early attachments, and habits, it raises a massive, almost existentially terrifying question for me.
What's that?
If the first two layers, the absolute foundation of our character, are completely locked in by our genetics, which we obviously didn't choose, and by how our parents treated us before we could even form conscious thoughts, which we also didn't choose, aren't we just deterministically doomed?
It feels that way.
Where does human agency actually come in? Are we just complex meat robots doomed to play out the faulty code of our childhood traumas forever?
It is a sobering, heavy realization, but it is not a fatalistic one. You must accept reality. You cannot change your genetic neurochemistry, and you cannot time travel to erase the wounds of your childhood. That foundation is set in stone.
So we are stuck.
But you are not a prisoner to it. The defining strength of the superior character lies entirely in conscious awareness. By doing the painful work of looking at your own repetitive, compulsive mistakes with brutal, unflinching honesty, you begin to recognize the pattern.
You see the matrix.
You realize, oh, I am sabotaging this relationship because my early attachment style makes me terrified of intimacy. And once you consciously see the pattern, the demon is dragged into the light, and you can intercept it.
You use the top layer, your habits, to forge new metal.
Exactly. You leverage the brain's neuroplasticity, but it requires immense, sustained effort. You have to consciously forge new neural pathways by repeatedly, deliberately putting yourself in highly uncomfortable situations that run counter to your compulsions. If your primal wiring makes you naturally avoidant and you compulsively flee from conflict, you must force yourself to stand your ground in small, low-stakes disagreements until a new behavioral habit is formed.
You have to practice it.
If you are naturally impulsive and aggressive, you must rigidly force yourself to delay every major decision by 24 hours. You use the top layer of conscious habits to act as a heavy brace, reinforcing and mitigating the structural weaknesses of the bottom layers. It is not a quick fix. It is the grueling, heroic work of a lifetime.
Wow. We really have to take a breath and synthesize the sheer volume of material we just decoded, because we covered a staggering amount of psychological ground today.
We truly traversed the depths of the human condition.
We started by putting on the lab coat and becoming cold, calculating mineralogists, learning to examine the jagged rocks of human absurdity without taking it personally.
Vital skill.
We explored the tragic fall of Athens to understand the relentless, invisible gravity of our own irrational biases, realizing how desperately our brains crave the comfort of the valley over the peak of objective truth.
The 3D mountain.
Right. We looked at the terrifying parasitic reality of the broken narcissistic thermostat and learned how Shackleton turned his self-love outward to build the empathic muscle.
Healthy narcissism.
We became decoders of the matrix, spotting the glitching pixels and the theatrical masks people wear, the asymmetrical, dead-eyed smiles, the delayed fist pounds of the deceiver. And finally, we drilled down through the dirt, past the social masks, to strike the absolute, unyielding bedrock of human character, realizing the terrifying mechanical truth that nobody does anything just once.
It is a profound, paradigm-altering journey into the mechanics of who we are. And as we conclude this first part of our exploration, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final perspective to mull over as you navigate the world this week.
Lay it on us.
The next time you are out in the world and someone aggressively cuts you off in traffic, or a colleague maliciously sabotages your project to boost their own ego, or a partner deeply and unfairly breaks your heart, what if you didn't get angry?
What if you just stopped?
What if you refused to take it personally, as an attack against your own worth? What if instead you utilize the mineralogist's lens and realize that they are, in essence, just a sleepwalker?
A sleepwalker.
They are trapped in a compulsive, repetitive behavioral pattern forged decades ago by genetic neurochemistry and early childhood wounds, operating almost entirely out of their conscious control. They are acting out a tragic script that they didn't even write.
That is so powerful.
If you can manage to see them not as a malicious villain, not as a personal enemy, but simply as a phenomenon of nature, like a sudden violent rainstorm or a rock falling down a mountain, you completely strip away their ability to hurt you emotionally. You step out of their chaotic narrative, and you have officially taken back your own psychological power.
You stop fighting the illusion of the Matrix and you start reading the underlying code. The X-ray machine isn't broken anymore. You just finally know exactly what you are looking at. And remember, we have only just scratched the surface of the subconscious. The rabbit hole goes infinitely deeper in our next deep dive. See you then. I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now, just for like 10 seconds.
Yeah, just pause.
If you're driving, obviously keep your eyes on the road. But in your mind, I want you to picture the one thing you want most in this world right now.
Well, that's a heavy question right out the gate.
I know, but picture it with absolute clarity. Is it like a specific person you are desperately trying to attract? Or maybe a massive promotion at work?
Or a very specific number in your bank account.
Exactly. Or maybe just that visceral feeling of finally walking into a room and being deeply, undeniably respected. Get that image in your head. Feel the weight of it.
Got it.
Good. Because now I am going to tell you a brutal, highly uncomfortable truth. You do not actually want that thing.
No, you don't. Not really.
What you want is the fantasy of what that thing represents. And the only reason you want it with such agonizing intensity is because you do not currently possess it.
It's the ultimate human illusion, right?
Yeah.
We are entirely captivated by the empty space.
Yes.
By the void of what's missing, rather than the reality of the actual object itself.
Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 2 of our 4-part mini-series, and we are picking up the exact second where our last deep dive left off.
We are diving straight back into the deep end.
Literally straight into the engine room of human psychology. We're continuing our journey through Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. Last time, we unpacked irrationality and narcissism.
Which was intense enough on its own.
Right. But today, we are looking at the mechanics of why we covet, why we panic, how we build these massive defensive walls around our egos.
And how we secretly sabotage our own lives.
Yeah, and finally, we're going to walk down into the psychological basement and confront the dark side that every single one of us is hiding.
It is going to be an intense exploration. We're fundamentally dismantling the polite fictions we tell ourselves, about why we do what we do.
So my promise to you, the listener, is this. By the end of this conversation, you're going to look at your own desires, your attitudes, and your hidden insecurities through a completely shattered and then rebuilt lens.
You definitely won't look at yourself the same way in the mirror tonight.
So keep that picture in your mind, that object of your deepest desire, because we are diving straight into the law of covetousness, the drive to become an elusive object of desire.
This is such a fascinating place to start.
I want to pause on that opening thought, though, because it challenges literally everything we're taught about goal setting. Like, why is it a universal human experience that the second we finally get the thing we've been agonizing over, the shine just instantly wears off?
To understand that, we have to look at the neurological and evolutionary reality of human desire. We are biologically wired to be driven by the pursuit.
Not the possession.
Right, not the possession. It's the dopamine system at work. Neurologically, dopamine is not the chemical of reward. Most people think it is, but it's not.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's actually the chemical of anticipation. It spikes when we are chasing something, when we're anticipating a future outcome.
Oh, wow. So the thrill really is in the chase.
Exactly. Once you possess the object, the anticipation dies, the dopamine drops, and the reality of the object sets in. So presence, meaning too much availability, too much visibility, or actual possession, It suffocates desire.
It kills it.
But absence, on the other hand, is the ultimate spur for interest.
Because absence forces the brain to actually do some work.
Precisely. When something is just always there, our brains naturally tune it out to conserve cognitive energy. It becomes background noise.
Like wallpaper.
Exactly, wallpaper. But when something is just out of reach, or when someone is slightly mysterious and absent, our imagination kicks in to fill that void.
We have to write the rest of the story.
Right. And here is the key. Our imagination is infinitely more intoxicating, idealized, and perfect than actual reality could ever be. You aren't falling in love with the person. You're falling in love with the incredibly idealized avatar of that person that your own imagination painted.
Painted onto the blank canvas of their absence. That is wild. We project our fantasies onto the empty space. It's literally like a movie screen in a dark theater.
That's a great way to put it.
And honestly, nobody in modern history understood how to project a movie onto reality better than Gabrielle Coco Chanel.
Oh, she was a master of this.
We have to talk about her because she weaponized this psychological law to build a global empire. Let's build this world for the listener. Picture Paris in the early 20th century, right? The Belle Epoque.
An era of absolute excess?
Complete excess. The wealthy elites are practically suffocating themselves. Women are wearing these rigid whalebone corsets that physically deform their ribs.
Sounds agonizing.
It was. And they're draped in heavy exotic fabrics, enormous velvet skirts, massive hats covered in, like, ostrich feathers. The entire culture is about overwhelming presence, suffocating detail, and screaming expense.
It was a society drowning in its own abundance. Everything was hyper-visible. The wealth was loudly proclaimed on every square inch of the body.
Right. And then here comes Coco Chanel. She was an absolute outsider. She grew up in an orphanage. She didn't have money. She didn't have status. And she certainly didn't have exotic silks.
Well, what did she do?
She took common, everyday, banal objects. She literally took plain boater hats that regular working-class men would buy in a cheap department store.
Which was completely scandalous for high society.
Oh, totally. And she started making dresses out of jersey, and we need to understand what jersey was back then. It was the absolute cheapest, most utilitarian material available. It was mostly used to make men's winter underwear.
It was the fabric of the invisible working class. It was the exact antithesis of high society fashion.
And what about her perfume?
Oh, Chanel number 5. The prevailing trend was for women to smell like a single, highly identifiable, incredibly expensive flower, like a walking rose or a walking jasmine plant.
Just a giant, wealthy flower.
Basically. But Chanel mixed common jasmine with synthetic aldehydes. These were chemicals that smelled like nothing found in nature, and she put it in a square, minimalist, almost medicinal glass bottle.
Which is so austere compared to the ornate crystal stuff everyone else had.
Objectively speaking, it was incredibly austere. But she used pure psychological magic to completely invert the value system.
She wore these simple, stripped-down outfits everywhere. She didn't try to blend in with the corseted women. She created a stark contrast.
She made her simplicity look like a rebellion.
Exactly. She understood this profound truth. People do not actually want truth in reality. The wealthy elites didn't want to buy a men's underwear dress and be told, hey, this is just cheap and practical.
No, they wanted a fantasy.
Right. They were suffocating in their rigid lives, and she offered them the ultimate transgressive fantasy. The illusion of freedom, of youth, of breaking the rules.
She made the cheap materials feel like a secret, exclusive club that all these wealthy women were desperately excluded from.
She transformed the mundane into the elusive.
By stripping away all the excessive detail, she created an aesthetic vacuum. And those women projected their own desperate desires for freedom right onto that simple black jersey dress.
Wow.
Greene actually breaks this exact phenomenon down into 3 core strategies for stimulating this kind of intense desire. The first one is withdrawal.
Which feels completely counterintuitive, right? Especially now, when we're told to constantly network and put ourselves out there.
It is counterintuitive, but deeply effective. You must have an initial presence, obviously. People have to know you exist, and you establish your value.
You can't just be invisible.
Right. But once that value is established, there has to be a touch of coldness to you, an ambiguity, a strategic withdrawal.
Why coldness?
Because if you are too obvious, if you're always available, if people can read your every need and schedule instantly, they unconsciously lose respect for you.
Because you become easy to categorize.
Exactly. Your value drops because you are essentially a known, unlimited quantity. But a slight step back signals immense self-worth. It unconsciously communicates, I do not desperately need your approval to survive.
Which instantly makes people want to chase you. We only want the things that might run away. It's totally the Michael Jackson strategy.
Michael Jackson is the textbook example of withdrawal on a massive scale.
After a huge album like Thriller, he wouldn't just flood the market with content.
No, he would physically and musically disappear. He carefully spread out his album releases by years. He tightly controlled his appearances, his interviews,
A single glove, the sunglasses.
obscuring his physical presence, yes. He never explained his lyrics. He systematically created a physical and mental emptiness around himself. And because nature abhors a vacuum, his fans filled that emptiness with obsessive, almost religious desire.
He gave them less, so they wanted more. The art of starving the crowd just enough to keep them desperate.
So that's withdrawal. The second strategy Greene outlines is creating rivalries of desire. And this one is incredibly visceral.
Oh, this one is brutal.
Greene argues that human desire is not objective. It's a completely social zero-sum game. And we learn this the second we learn to walk.
It's toddlers.
Yes, it's rooted in the psychological concept of mimetic desire. We don't naturally know what to want, so we imitate the desires of others.
Put a toddler in a room with 100 toys. They might casually play with one. But bring a second toddler in.
And the moment that second child picks up a completely mundane plastic block,
The first child suddenly wants that exact block with life or death intensity.
exactly, it's rooted in our childhood competition for parental attention. We learn that if our sibling gets attention, we get less. So we covet the object of their affection.
We want it simply because they want it. And that governs the rest of our adult lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If we see a person at a party standing alone, our brain signals there must be something wrong with them. But if we see a group fighting over a product or someone highly sought after, our brain screams, that must be immensely valuable.
We desire the job with 1,000 applicants.
To become an object of desire, you must cultivate the aura that you are desired by many others.
Okay, and the third strategy is induction. This is a fascinating sociological concept. Greene suggests modern life is essentially a giant invisible cage.
We live in a hyper-regulated, surveilled society.
Strict social codes, HR departments, endless routines. We are quite literally crushed by the mundane constraints of reality. And because of that intense pressure, we secretly yearn for the transgressive.
We want an escape hatch.
Yes, we want the taboo. We want the unattainable shortcut to youth or wealth or forbidden pleasure. And if you can associate yourself or your product with that forbidden escape hatch.
If you hint that you hold the secret to bypassing the boring rules everyone else follows,
People will completely lose their rational minds trying to get to you.
because you're offering relief from the burden of civilization.
Okay, I want to pause on this and really debate the premise here, because when I look at these three strategies, withdrawal, rivalries of desire, and induction, it sounds exactly like the mechanics of modern hype culture.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Think about limited edition streetwear drops, like Supreme. They will literally release a clay brick with the word Supreme stamped on it.
I remember that.
Objectively, it's a $5 piece of baked dirt. But they use absence by only making 500 of them. They use rivalry by making kids camp outside to fight over them. And they use induction by associating the brand with transgressive skate culture.
It creates a hypnotic frenzy. It's the exact same psychological exploit Chanel used, just applied to a brick.
Human neurology hasn't changed. But here's where I want to push back on Greene. Hasn't society evolved past this on an interpersonal level?
What do you mean?
Look at our culture today with social media and therapy speak. We are explicitly taught to value vulnerability. Extreme honesty is the highest virtue, right? We want CEOs and romantic partners to be totally transparent, authentic, and share their mental health struggles online. Doesn't this radical transparency completely negate the power of mystery?
It's a vital question, and it's one of Greene's most provocative points. He directly addresses this modern obsession with authenticity.
And what does he say?
We tell ourselves we're highly evolved beings because we blast our passing thoughts and flaws onto the internet. But Greene argues this isn't moral progress at all. It is a masquerade.
A masquerade.
He says it's actually just extreme self-absorption and sheer intellectual laziness disguised as virtue.
Laziness. Wow, calling authenticity lazy is a massive punch to the gut for a lot of people.
Let's break down the mechanics. It requires absolutely no effort, no discipline, and no emotional intelligence to just be your raw, unfiltered self and vomit your internal monologue into the void.
Right.
It requires zero strategic thought. It shows a complete lack of consideration for the imagination of your audience. When you do this, You prioritize your own catharsis over the experience of others.
And the result.
The result is that people's interest in you becomes incredibly paper-thin. When you explicitly map out every single like, dislike, trauma, and daily habit, you become entirely predictably familiar.
And familiarity breeds contempt. Or, well, deep indifference.
Exactly. Mystery binds human interest. When you are totally transparent, you're no longer an elusive object of desire. You're just another noisy, easily categorized data point in a crowded world.
You become the wallpaper. So by vomiting our authenticity everywhere, we are suffocating people. We're robbing them of the fantasy. That is wild.
It completely flips the script on personal branding, doesn't it?
We think we're connecting, but we're actually making ourselves boring. Okay, so we're blindly pulled around by what is absent. But the terrifying thing is, as Greene transitions to the next concept, he shows we are equally victimized by what is right in front of our faces.
Which brings us to the law of short-sightedness.
If covetousness is about being manipulated by what isn't there, short-sightedness is about being manipulated by the immediate present.
This law deals entirely with our primal, animal relationship to time. We have a deeply ingrained evolutionary bias to obsess over what we can see and hear right now, the present tense.
The latest news cycle, viral trends, office drama.
Because for hundreds of thousands of years, that was the only way to survive.
Right, an evolutionary mismatch. On the savannah, if you didn't pay attention to the rustling bush, you were eaten.
You didn't have the luxury of pondering a 5-year strategic plan. You had to react to sensory input. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, floods your body with cortisol to make you act instantly.
But today, an angry email from a boss triggers the exact same chemical dump as a lion in the bushes.
Precisely. We overreact to minor slights. We panic and sell all our investments when the market dips. We fall for alluring get-rich-quick schemes because they promise immediate release to our anxieties.
We're running around with buckets putting out tiny fires while the foundation of the house rots away, slaves to the urgent at the expense of the important. So, how do we fix this hardware problem?
Greene argues the antidote is evolving into what he calls the far-sighted human. We have to actively, painfully elevate our perspective. Think about how clear things are in hindsight, right?
Wisdom always arrives late.
Exactly. The trick is to manufacture the psychological effect of time in the present moment. When you face a perceived crisis, your animal brain heats up. You must train yourself to consciously detach from that heat. Slow the perception of time down in your mind.
Which requires changing our whole philosophical relationship with time. We usually view time as the enemy. The ticking clock, we're aging, falling behind.
But Greene says time, aging, and even death are our greatest allies if we use them correctly.
They provide the ultimate framing device. If you're having a panic attack about something embarrassing you said, and you force your brain to fast forward in a year, that crisis literally won't exist in your memory. Your anxiety drops today.
You use the vastness of the future to dilute the intensity of the present.
Yes. Think about like a stock market app. If you look at the 1-minute chart, it is terrifying. A chaotic roller coaster. Massive spikes. Terrifying crashes.
It looks like the financial world is ending.
If you trade based on that 1-minute chart, you panic and lose everything. But if you literally just take your thumb and zoom out to the 5-year chart, all of that violent volatility completely disappears. It smooths out into a relatively boring, steady line trending up.
The reality of the asset hasn't changed, only your temporal perspective has.
Exactly. But how do we actually force our brains to zoom out to the 5-year chart when the primal alarm bells of the 1-minute chart are ringing loudly in our ears?
It requires supreme willpower. Far-sighted people understand that short-term, panicky thinking is highly socially contagious.
It infects the whole group.
Yes, like a virus through mirror neurons. To zoom out, you have to physically and mentally sever yourself from the group's energetic field. You don't respond to the inflammatory email immediately. You write a draft, and you sleep on it.
You ask second and third order questions. If I do this today, what are the consequences in a month, in a year?
You force the prefrontal cortex to override the amygdala. By widening our relationship to time, we stop being reactive pawns. We become superior strategists.
We become the calm center of the storm. But there's a massive catch here. It's one thing to elevate our own perspective. We control our own minds.
Theoretically, anyway.
Right. But what happens when we try to change the narrow, stubborn perspective of someone else? That's when we hit a reinforced titanium brick wall.
And that perfectly sets up the law of defensiveness.
This is maybe the most practical law in the book.
Oh, absolutely. The core reality is this. People are naturally profoundly stubborn. They are highly resistant to outside influence. And we have to understand why. It isn't just because they disagree with your facts.
Why is it?
Because yielding to someone else's idea fundamentally challenges their deep psychological need to feel autonomous. To influence them, you cannot attack them with logic or forceful arguments. Brute force creates equal resistance.
You have to soften their resistance by paradoxically confirming their self-opinion. To get them to move, make them feel like they're already standing in the right place.
Exactly. Greene uses an incredible historical case study for this. Lyndon B. Johnson.
LBJ. Let's clarify, we aren't evaluating his politics here, just his psychological tactics.
Right. LBJ was a masterful political operator, but not at first. Early in his career, he kept hitting walls. He tried to charm people the way amateurs do, by talking endlessly about his own ideas and accomplishments.
Proving how smart he was, which just makes other people turn inward and feel small. It raises their defenses.
But around age 40, LBJ made a massive strategic shift. He completely stopped talking about himself. He developed the Johnson treatment.
Oh, the legendary Johnson treatment. Picture this towering guy cornering a rival senator. He'd grab them by the lapels, step deep into their personal space, and make them the undisputed star of the universe for 10 minutes.
He listened to their minor grievances as if they were the Gettysburg Address. He asked for advice on things he already knew. He systematically lowered their defenses by wrapping them in a warm blanket of their own ego.
Because he intuitively understood the deep architecture of the human ego.
Every single human relies on three fundamental pillars of self-opinion to keep their psyche intact. Three lies we tell ourselves.
What are they?
1, I am autonomous. I am acting of my own free will. 2, I am intelligent in my own unique way. And 3, I am essentially a good, decent person.
And if you use logic to challenge any of those,
Massive iron walls go up instantly. They perceive you as a literal threat to their survival, and you will never influence them.
So how do we apply the Johnson treatment? Greene gives us the 5 strategies of the master persuader. Strategy 1, deep listening. And this isn't just nodding while you wait to speak.
No, most people are just drafting their next clever sentence in their head. True, deep listening requires active, ruthless suppression of your internal monologue. You project your mind entirely into their words. It profoundly validates their intelligence.
Strategy 2, infecting with mood. This relies on mirror neurons, right?
Yes. If someone smiles at you warmly, your mirror neurons force your facial muscles to micro-contract into a smile. You experience a ghost of their emotion.
Greene uses Marie de Vionnet from Henry James's The Ambassadors. She had this conscious mildness. She never argued, just exuded unconditional indulgence.
It hypnotizes targets. Approach an angry person with relaxed, non-judgmental curiosity, and their biology forces them to downregulate and relax with you. You disarm them with an infectious, energetic state.
Strategy 3, confirming self-opinion, validating those 3 pillars. Like Benjamin Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, validating intelligence.
Disraeli was a master of the tactical loss. Arguing with a rival, or even Queen Victoria, he would actively allow them to defeat him in a minor, irrelevant argument.
He'd concede with grace, act like they revealed a profound truth.
Right. By intentionally losing the small battle, he swelled their ego. Their defenses vanished, and they became pliable to his actual agenda.
Brilliant. Strategy 4, allaying insecurities. Everyone has a specific, gnawing insecurity.
Yes, the master persuader spots that hidden doubt and applies highly targeted flattery. You don't flatter a beautiful person on their looks, you flatter their intellect, soothing the insecurity they actually worry about.
And finally, strategy 5, using resistance or mental judo. This is for the truly stubborn. Greene tells this visceral story of a rebellious teenager suspended from school.
The teen wanted revenge on the administration. Direct discipline from the mother just fueled the fire.
So the therapist told the mom to use reverse psychology. She sat down and completely agreed with his rebellion. She told him the principal wanted him to fail.
So the best way to get revenge was to stay home and do nothing, giving the school exactly what they wanted.
Which removed the friction entirely. By aligning with his aggressive energy, slacking off wasn't rebellious anymore. It was capitulating to the principal.
He ended up studying furiously just to assert his will against his mother's new advice. You grab their aggressive momentum and flip them over.
Okay, wait. Let me pause and step back here. I have to push back because I can hear the audience screaming right now. When you lay out these 5 strategies, faking tactical losses, using mental judo on your kids, isn't this just dark, highly manipulative, borderline sociopathic behavior?
That is the most common objection to Greene's work.
Shouldn't we just strive to be honest and direct with people? Why play these deceptive games?
Greene absolutely dismantles the people he calls honesty mongers. Humans cannot stand powerlessness. We all want to influence our environment. Those who claim to be purely honest, who insist on bludgeoning people with direct truth, are often just intellectually lazy.
Lazy. How so?
It requires zero effort or empathy to just say what's on your mind. You aren't trying to understand the fragile psychology of the person across from you. And when their direct approach fails, because it raises defenses, what do?
Oh, they get mad.
Worse. They resort to passive-aggressive pouting, guilt-tripping, and emotional manipulation to get what they want, all while maintaining this morally superior self-image.
Wow. So the lack of conscious strategy forces them into unconscious manipulation.
Exactly. Greene argues that being strategic is actually a profoundly pro-social act. It's deep empathy. You navigate a complex world of irrational people without descending into destructive bloodbaths.
Strategy is the grease that keeps civilization turning without grinding the gears to dust. That makes an uncomfortable amount of sense.
It really does.
But here's the tragic irony. We spend so much energy trying to bypass the defenses of other people while completely ignoring the mental prisons we build for ourselves.
We lock ourselves inside.
Which brings us to the law of self-sabotage.
We're moving from interpersonal to interpersonal reality here. The core principle is that objective reality does not exist for the human brain. Every single one of us views the world through a highly specific lens or attitude.
Carl Jung called it a readiness of the psyche to act or react in a certain way.
Yes. Your attitude dictates what information your brain notices, how you interpret neutral events, and ultimately, what destiny you create.
To understand this lens, look at the story of the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov. His story is cinematic tragedy, but also triumph. He was born in this freezing town in Russia. His grandfather had been a literal serf.
Extreme poverty.
Extreme poverty. But worse was his father, a religious fanatic, a tyrannical hypocrite who beat Anton and his brothers mercilessly while demanding total perfection.
An environment perfectly designed to crush the human spirit. And it did crush his older siblings. Facing the exact same trauma, his brothers Alexander and Nikolai developed a constricted, deeply negative attitude.
They succumbed to alcoholism and carried the trauma until it killed them. But Anton, in the exact same house, receiving the exact same beatings, developed a completely different lens.
An expansive attitude.
Right, an ironic, detached attitude. He trained his mind to observe his father almost like a character in a dark comedy. He separated his ego from the abuse. He wasn't a victim, he was an observer.
And that allowed him to survive and become one of history's greatest writers. Chekhov illustrates the two main categories, the constricted attitude and the expansive attitude.
The brain is a prediction machine.
Exactly. The constricted attitude is born of fear. It predicts the world as hostile. To cope, the person narrows the aperture of their life. If you expect the world to hurt you, you shrink your world to control it.
Greene breaks down the constricted attitude into three types. The avoidant attitude, terrified of failure, avoiding responsibility. The hostile attitude, predicting betrayal, constantly picking fights preemptively. And the resentful attitude, carrying a mental ledger of every slight, poisoning their own minds with bitterness. I use this analogy. It's like a literal Instagram filter surgically slapped over your eyeballs. If you have the hostile filter on, you can walk past a stranger with a completely neutral expression, and your brain processes it through the filter and says, "That guy is glaring at me. He wants to fight."
The filter alters your perceived reality.
But my question is, if we didn't consciously choose this filter, if it was slapped on during childhood trauma, how do we peel it off?
It's incredibly difficult. It starts with understanding the terrifying mechanism of the self-fulfilling prophecy. With your hostile filter example, you approach that stranger with hostile expectations. Without realizing it, your body language becomes rigid, your tone gets sharp.
And what does the stranger do?
The previously neutral stranger reacts to your aggressive energy with actual defensive hostility. They glare back. You just elicited the exact response you feared, providing your brain with proof that the world is hostile.
You literally manifest the nightmare you're trying to avoid.
A downward spiral. To break it, you must aggressively adopt the expansive attitude. You have to assume radical responsibility. Actively view your brain as a neuroplastic organ capable of continual growth.
Reframing adversity.
Right. The constricted mind says, I am cursed. The expansive mind says, this is a training ground to toughen my resilience. By consciously forcing yourself to act open and fearless, even if you feel completely terrified and fake at first, You change your external output.
You soften your tone, you approach people with warmth, and because of mirror neurons, you generate positive, relaxed reactions from others.
Creating an upward spiral. The external validation provides new evidence to your brain, rewriting the prediction machine.
You hack your own reality.
Yeah.
But let me lean in here and whisper a very dark truth to you, the listener. Even if you do this work, even if you peel off the negative filter, there is still a monster hiding in the basement of your psyche.
Oh, absolutely.
You haven't evicted it. You just put a nice rug over the trapdoor. It's time to unlock the door. The law of repression. Confronting the dark side.
The deepest layer of human psychology. Jung's concept of the shadow. Beneath our polite, civilized exterior lurks a massive repository of dark energy. Repressed insecurities, aggressive impulses, primal envies.
And we violently hide these traits from our conscious selves.
Greene illustrates this with a figure synonymous with self-inflicted downfall. Richard Nixon. Again, analyzing the psychology, not the politics. Nixon crafted a meticulous public persona of extreme niceness. The moral crusader. The mild-mannered Quaker.
But that persona was a massive steel vault door.
Covering a churning cauldron of deep insecurities, Nixon harbored a profound paranoia and resentment against the wealthy elites who looked down on him, a ruthless desire to destroy his enemies.
And the shadow operates like a steam engine with the release valve welded shut. The pressure builds, it has to leak.
And it did leak. The Watergate break-in, the enemies' lists, the secret audio recordings, the polite man on TV was recorded delivering profane, paranoid rants.
His repressed dark side completely bypassed his conscious control and destroyed him. So where does this monster come from? We aren't born with a shadow, are we?
Actually, we are born as raw animal energy. Think about a toddler.
Toddlers are monsters.
Beautifully selfish monsters. They have cruel impulses, they hit, they throw violent tantrums, but very quickly socialization begins. Parents and society discipline us. We learn to tamp down our selfishness to fit into the tribe.
Which is necessary for civilization.
True. But the energy doesn't disappear just because a parent yells, "Stop being angry." The child just learns that expressing anger threatens their survival. So the energy goes underground. The shadow is born.
And the older we get, the heavier that vault door gets, leading to what Greene calls leakage.
The shadow always finds a way out. Usually when our conscious control weakens, when we are stressed, exhausted, or intoxicated, someone gets drunk, screams at their boss, and says, "That wasn't the real me, it was the alcohol."
But Greene says the exact opposite.
Yes. The polite person on Tuesday wasn't the real you. The vicious, screaming person on Friday night was the real you. Your unfiltered shadow finally got a microphone.
It also leaks out in our judgments of others. We vehemently hate in others what we are terrified of acknowledging in ourselves. Which leads to the most mind-bending concept, the law of opposites.
The law of opposites states that when someone displays a highly emphatic, aggressively broadcasted personality trait, hypermasculinity, extreme saintly morality, unusually loud confidence, it is almost always a desperate cover for the exact opposite trait hidden in their shadow.
The hypermasculine bully is covering profound vulnerability. The extreme moral crusader is battling massive, repressed, taboo desires.
The louder they scream their virtue, the darker the vice in the basement.
It's a flawless diagnostic tool. So what's the solution? How do we fix it before it destroys us? Greene's 4 steps to integration.
Step 1. See the shadow. Stop denying it.
Yeah.
Observe your emotional outbursts. Look at your dreams, the unfiltered cinema of the shadow.
Step 2. Embrace the shadow. Painful, but you have to accept you aren't a pure angel. You have selfish desires.
Step 3. Explore the shadow. Channel that raw energy constructively into your career ambition or creative art. Give the steam engine a productive release valve.
Step 4. Show the shadow. Stop being a chronic people pleaser. Allow yourself to be a little rough, a little dangerous.
Right.
But wait, let me push back. Society functions because we repress our dark urges. If everyone let their shadow out, wouldn't we have complete anarchy?
It's a valid fear. But Greene quotes Horace, "You can throw out nature with a pitchfork, but she'll always come back."
Yeah.
Complete repression pressurizes the shadow. It makes it explosive. Look at Steve Jobs.
He was notoriously difficult.
He did not repress his shadow. He was demanding, had a ferocious temper, refused to compromise. But that dark side was interwoven with his creative genius. If you surgically removed his shadow to make him nice, you amputate his power. Apple wouldn't exist.
You don't kill the monster. You harness it to pull your chariot. You use the dark energy to fuel your light. What an incredible paradigm shift. And that brings us to the finish line of this absolute sprint.
We covered massive ground today.
We did. We learned the magic of covetousness, using absence and mystery to become elusive. We tackled short-sightedness, learning to zoom out to the 5-year chart. We navigated defensiveness, sneaking past egos, using the Johnson treatment and mental judo.
We turned inward to self-sabotage, shattering our negative, constricted filters.
And finally, we shook hands with the monster in the basement, our shadow, discovering that integrating our dark side unlocks our authentic power.
It really is a total reconstruction of how we view our motivations. And I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought.
Lay it on us.
We've talked about masks and shadows. I want you to think about the one personality trait you are most proud of, the one you broadcast the loudest on your resume, your dating profile.
Okay.
Are you truly that brave or that endlessly kind? Or, based on the law of opposites, is that exact shining trait merely the heaviest vault door you have ever built? A door specifically designed to lock away your deepest, most terrifying insecurity from the world and from yourself.
Wow. Let that echo in your mind tonight when you look in the mirror. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. You survived episode 2. But rest up, let your prefrontal cortex recover because we are plunging even deeper next time. Until then, stay elusive, zoom out, peel off the hostile filter, and don't be afraid of the dark. We will catch you on the next deep dive. So picture this. You're sitting in a conference room. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead. You've got your lukewarm coffee in front of you, and you have just pitched an idea that you spent, the last 3 weeks perfecting.
Oh yeah, you're exhausted, but you know it's good.
Right. It is totally bulletproof. It solves this massive problem for your department. So you finish, you look around the table, and you're just waiting for the applause. But instead, you look at your manager. And for a fraction of a second, maybe like a tenth of a heartbeat, you see their jaw tighten. You see their eyes just sort of deaden.
Yep, the mask drops.
Exactly. And then instantly, this perfectly polite plastic smile stretches across their face, and they say, well, that's really ambitious, but I think we need to reel it in and focus on the basics right now. In that tiny fraction of a second, you didn't just get a rejection, you tripped over an invisible wire.
A very dangerous wire.
You encountered this force that, it literally destroys careers, it shatters marriages, and it completely hollows out human potential.
It's the ultimate psychological camouflage, really. We walk through life assuming that human interaction is this, well-lit room where people's motives are clearly labeled right on their foreheads. But that is a deeply comforting illusion. The reality is that we are all operating in a landscape riddled with these invisible tripwires. They're driven by forces we actively hide from each other and, much more terrifyingly, forces we hide from ourselves.
Welcome back to the third installment of our massive deep dive into Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. If you've been on this journey with us, you know we've already waded through some incredibly dense territory. We've dissected narcissism, we've unmasked the emotional self, and we've stared directly into the repressed shadow of the human psyche.
Which was heavy enough on its own.
Totally. But today we are leaving the foundational stuff behind. We are going straight into the red zone. This is going to be a high-velocity, highly dopaminergic sprint through the mind's absolute most dangerous booby traps. We are talking about the venom of envy, the delusion of grandiosity, the self-mutilation of gender rigidity, the void of aimlessness, and the terrifying gravitational pull of the group.
Because these are the elements of human nature that don't just cause minor friction in your day. They are highly volatile, often unconscious drives that lead to systemic failures in our lives. If you do not understand the mechanics of how these forces operate, both within yourself and in people around you, you're essentially flying blind.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are here to strap a pair of psychological night vision goggles right onto your head. We're going to take these abstract, really dense psychological frameworks and translate them into vivid, cinematic mental models for you. The goal is that tomorrow morning, when you walk into that office or sit down with your family, you will literally see the matrix of human behavior unfolding in real time.
You'll see the code.
Exactly. But before we fire up those night vision goggles, we need a very quick, very important ground rule.
Right. It is absolutely essential to state this, especially given the historical territory we're entering today.
Yeah, so we are going to be unpacking some deeply polarizing historical figures as case studies today. We will be looking at the strategic psychology of everyone from Mao Zedong to Martin Luther King Jr. Let me make this crystal clear right now. We are entirely neutral here. We are not endorsing any political ideology, left or right.
Not at all.
We are not making moral judgments on their policies. We are purely examining these figures exactly as they are presented in the source text as masterful or terrifying case studies of human nature and group dynamics. We're looking at the raw mechanics of how these individuals navigated or manipulated human behavior.
Because if you want to actually learn from history, you have to, at least temporarily, suspend your own emotional and political biases. You have to look at the psychological machinery with the cold, objective eye of a mechanic looking at an engine. Like, how does the machine work? What fuels it? That is our only focus.
So let's open up the hood on the most toxic engine of all. In our last deep dive, we talked about the shadow, the repressed dark side of our personality. But Greene argues that there is one specific manifestation of that shadow that leaks into our daily lives more than anything else. It is the fragile ego, and its primary weapon is envy.
And the psychology of envy is notoriously difficult to study because it is the one emotion that almost no human being will ever willingly admit to experiencing. I mean, you can find people who will proudly admit to being deeply angry or ruthlessly greedy or even wildly lustful.
Oh, yeah, people brag about that stuff. I'm so aggressive in business,
Exactly. They will wear those traits like a badge of honor, a sign of their intensity. But to admit to envy, that requires admitting to a profound, agonizing sense of inferiority. It requires your ego to acknowledge out loud that someone else has something you fundamentally lack and that their possession of it makes you feel small.
So why are we cursed with this? If it feels so terrible, if it's so shameful, why is our brain wired to care so deeply about the fact that, I don't know, the guy in the cubicle next to us got a nicer company car or that our sister-in-law bought a bigger house?
To understand the why, we have to look at the evolutionary mechanism behind status. Go back to early human hunter-gatherer tribes. In an environment defined by extreme scarcity and constant physical danger, your literal biological survival depended entirely on your status within the group hierarchy.
Right, because if you're at the bottom...
If you were at the bottom of the pecking order, you received the poorest cuts of meat, you were given the least protection from predators, and during a famine, you were the most expendable.
Status wasn't about ego back then. It was literally about calories and physical safety.
Precisely. So the human brain evolved an incredibly sensitive, always-on radar system to constantly measure our status against those around us. It is a primal survival mechanism. We are biologically compelled to assess the respect, the resources, and the attention others are receiving, and instantaneously compare it to our own pile. If someone else's pile suddenly gets bigger, our primitive brain doesn't just say, oh, good for them.
It freaks out.
It fires off an alarm bell that says, your survival is now threatened, you are being pushed down the hierarchy.
So we are all walking around with this invisible internal yardstick, just constantly sizing everyone up. But in the modern world, my coworker getting a promotion doesn't mean I'm going to starve to death on the savannah.
No, but your nervous system doesn't know that. The hardware is ancient. When we perceive that someone is getting more attention or success, that primitive threat response misfires. But here is where the psychological mutation happens. Modern society tells us that being jealous is petty, ugly, and shameful. So we cannot express it. We repress it. We push that burning sense of inferiority deep down into the unconscious shadow.
And when you lock something in the dark, it mutates. I picture envy as carbon monoxide. It is totally colorless. It is completely odorless, but it is absolutely lethal to a relationship or a career. You don't even know you're breathing it in until you are already suffocating. Because nobody ever walks up to you and says, hey, your recent success makes me feel deeply inadequate, so I'm going to subtly sabotage your reputation.
No, never.
It is always a covert operation.
It has to be covert.
Yeah.
The envier cannot allow you, or even themselves, to see their feelings of inadequacy. They have to disguise the attack. And this is where the night vision goggles come in. The source material outlines specific behavioral leaks, micro-expressions, and tactics that give an envious person away if you know what you're looking at.
Okay, let's break these down. How do we spot the carbon monoxide? Because I want to know who is smiling to my face while setting a trap.
The first, and often most counterintuitive warning sign, is effusive praise and hyper-accelerated bids for friendship. You need to be incredibly wary of people who are overly eager to attach themselves to your life, particularly if you have recently achieved some level of status or success. They will shower you with flattery that feels slightly out of proportion to your actual relationship. They are impatient to make themselves useful to you.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit, because if I adopt that mindset, I'm just going to become incredibly paranoid, right?
Mm.
How do you differentiate between someone who is just a little socially awkward but genuinely wants to be my friend and someone who is laying a psychological trap fueled by envy?
The differentiation is entirely in the mechanism of their attention. A socially awkward but genuine person is trying to build a bridge of mutual connection. An envious person is conducting reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance, wow.
Yes, they are using flattery to get past your defenses so they can gather intimate information about you. They want to know your insecurities, your past failures, your weak spots. Why? Because once they have that data, they can subtly leak it as gossip later, or use it to quietly undermine your reputation when you aren't in the room.
It's an infiltration tactic. They hug you so they can find the gap in your armor.
Exactly. And if you want the ultimate litmus test to tell the difference between a genuine friend and an envious infiltrator, you have to watch their face during your moments of triumph. So this goes back to your conference room example. When you share genuinely good news, you got the raise, your partner proposed, your project succeeded, a true friend will experience sympathetic joy. Their face will light up.
And the envy.
An envious person will experience a visceral, almost involuntary biological reaction of unease. You will see a micro-expression of disappointment. Their jaw might tighten, their eyes might momentarily deaden, or their smile will appear slightly asymmetrical and forced. It usually only lasts a fraction of a second before the mask goes back up, but if you are watching, it is undeniable.
It's that tiny glitch in the matrix. You say, I got the promotion, and for half a second, they look like they just smelled spoiled milk, and then they say, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you. And usually that fake praise is immediately followed by the second warning sign, the backhanded compliment.
Ah, yes. The subtle dig disguised as good-natured humor or helpful advice. This is the envier's favorite weapon because it offers complete, plausible deniability. They will deliver a compliment wrapped around a barb. Or they will constantly tease you about a very specific, raw insecurity you have in front of an audience.
And when you rightfully get upset, they deploy the ultimate defense. Wow, I was just joking. Don't be so sensitive.
Right. I'm just playing devil's advocate, or
Yeah.
I'm just keeping you grounded.
No, you are drawing blood to lower my status. I think everyone listening has experienced that. But the text highlights one specific archetype of the envier that I find deeply disturbing, especially for anyone navigating a corporate hierarchy. The insecure master.
It is a devastating dynamic. We naturally assume that people in positions of high authority, bosses, directors, senior leaders, are secure in themselves because their high status is objectively validated by their rank. But for a specific psychological profile, reaching a high position actually dramatically increases their internal terror.
Wait, really? Why?
Because they secretly suffer from acute imposter syndrome. They know deep down they do not possess the talent or the grit that their title implies.
So they are sitting on the throne, but they are terrified someone is going to realize they are wearing a paper crown.
Precisely. And how do they react to that terror? They look downward. If an insecure master sees a subordinate who is naturally charismatic, highly competent, or effortlessly creative, they do not view that person as an asset to the team's overarching mission. They view that subordinate as a direct existential threat to their fragile ego.
So they don't want the team to win if it means the subordinate looks too good.
The sheer talent of the subordinate is a mirror reflecting the master's own inadequacy. So the master will actively work to suppress them. They will steal their ideas, keep them off high-visibility projects, or slowly isolate them from the rest of the company, all while claiming they're just mentoring them.
So if you are listening to this and you have a boss who constantly nitpicks your best work but promotes the aggressively mediocre sycophants, you aren't crazy. You are being suffocated by the insecure master's carbon monoxide. So what is the defense? How do we survive this?
The most immediate tactical defense is camouflage. You have to actively deflect envy by drawing attention away from your own brilliance. If you are highly successful, do not flaunt the ease of your success. Openly attribute a large portion of your wins to luck, to fortunate timing, and most importantly, to the hard work and guidance of the people around you, especially your boss.
Oh, so you have to feed the bees.
You have to actively soothe the fragile egos in your orbit. Make them feel incredibly valued and indispensable to your success.
There is a quote from the ancient Greek playwright Aeschylus in the text that perfectly captures this dark truth. He wrote over 2,000 years ago, "For not many men can love a friend who fortune prospers without envying. His own woundings he must nurse, and feel another's gladness like a curse." Your happiness is literally painful to them.
It registers in their primitive brain as an attack. So you must soften the blow. But the deeper, long-term defense against envy isn't just about managing other people. It is about rewiring your own internal metrics. If you derive your self-worth from external comparisons like, I have a better title than him, or I make more money than her, you are voluntarily stepping onto the primate status treadmill.
You're just asking to be miserable.
You are making yourself vulnerable to both experiencing envy and attracting it. You have to shift to an internal standard of measurement.
Did I execute this specific task with absolute mastery? Not, did the boss like my presentation better than Dave's?
Exactly. When your focus is rigorously tied to the craftsmanship of the work itself and your own internal standard of excellence, you insulate yourself. The petty games of measurement lose their psychological grip on you.
Which is the perfect pivot. Because if envy is the feeling of our ego being crushed by the weight of comparison, what happens when the exact opposite occurs? What happens when our ego is suddenly freed from gravity, drinks a magic potion, and balloons completely out of control? That is the transition into the psychological disease of grandiosity.
And it is a profound and dangerous shift. Envy causes us to act out covertly against other people. Grandiosity causes us to act out overtly against reality itself. Human nature dictates that the moment we experience a sudden, concentrated dose of success, we develop an almost instantaneous psychological amnesia.
Amnesia, like we forget how we got there.
We completely forget the role that random chance, fortunate timing, or the exhaustive labor of our colleagues played in that win. We suddenly attribute the positive outcome entirely to our own innate solitary genius. We believe we have developed a golden touch.
I always picture grandiosity like the classic Alice in Wonderland scenario. Success is that little glass bottle that says, drink me. You take one sip of real success, maybe a video you made goes viral, or you close a massive deal, or you get promoted to VP, and suddenly, in your own mind, you grow 50 feet tall. You look down at the maze of your industry. Previously, you respected the maze, you navigated the corners, you learned the dead ends, you collaborated to solve the puzzles. But now...
Now you're a giant.
Exactly. You look at the maze and think, I don't need to learn the layout. I can just step right over the walls. You completely lose touch with the ground level of reality.
That is an incredibly accurate visualization because grandiosity literally warps your cognitive perception of size, scale, and proportion. Under its influence, monumental, complex challenges suddenly seem trivial. You view yourself as massive and infallible. And the most dangerous part, you begin to view other human beings not as complex individuals, but as predictable, two-dimensional pawns whose only purpose is to serve your grand, sweeping vision.
But I want to dig into the mechanism here. Why is the human brain so eager, so desperate, to turn us into 50-foot giants the second we get a taste of victory? Why don't we just say, cool, I won, let's get back to work?
To understand the root of the God complex, we have to rewind all the way back to infancy. The psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut dedicated his work to understanding this exact phenomenon, which he called infantile narcissism. Think about the sensory experience of a newborn in their first few months of life. They are completely bonded to their mother. But from the infant's cognitive perspective, they do not realize the mother is a separate entity.
Right, their brain hasn't developed that boundary yet.
Exactly. The infant feels a pang of hunger, they let out a cry, and miraculously, food materializes. They feel a chill, they cry, and warmth envelops them.
They literally think they are bending the universe to their will. It's like magic.
They believe they are omnipotent. Their mere desire shapes reality. But as the infant develops, a devastating psychological rupture occurs. They slowly begin to realize that they are not omnipotent. They realize they are actually incredibly small, shockingly weak, and utterly dependent on a separate, autonomous being who does not always respond instantly to their demands. Kohut argued that this realization is our first and most profound psychological trauma.
The loss of omnipotence.
The loss of omnipotence. And we spend the rest of our adult lives unconsciously trying to compensate for that trauma. We are desperately trying to recapture that infantile feeling of total control and absolute centrality to the universe through fantasies of wealth, power, and fame.
That is wild. So every megalomaniacal CEO screaming at their board of directors, every dictatorial film director terrorizing a set. Fundamentally, we are looking at a giant infant trying to get their magic wand back so they don't have to feel the terror of being small and helpless.
Reduced to its absolute core psychological mechanism, yes. And when society hands them a massive victory, it acts as a trigger. The repressed infantile grandiosity comes roaring back to the surface. The ego says, aha, I am a god after all.
Okay, so if I'm listening to this, I'm probably thinking, well, I'm not a megalomaniac CEO, so this doesn't apply to me. But that's the trap, right? We all experience microdoses of this. I know I have. You get a string of wins, and suddenly you start feeling yourself a little too much. What is the visceral bodily sensation of grandiosity creeping in? How do we catch ourselves before we step over the maze?
The physical and behavioral symptoms are highly distinct if you possess the self-awareness to monitor them. First, observe your speech patterns. When the grandiose delusion takes hold, you will naturally begin to speak louder than usual. Your cadence will speed up.
Because you feel like the most important person in the room.
Exactly. You are unconsciously trying to dominate the physical space with your voice, leaving very little oxygen in the room for contrary opinions. You might even find yourself physically invading people's personal space, gesturing wildly, assuming your sheer presence is commanding.
I've definitely felt that. It's like your internal RPMs are running way too hot.
But the most glaring, undeniable symptom is an extreme, highly disproportionate touchiness when criticized. Because your ego has expanded to this fantastical balloon-like size, the surface tension is incredibly high. Any pinprick of criticism, even mild constructive feedback on a minor detail, registers not as helpful advice, but as a mortal threat to your inflated self-image.
Oh man, yeah. You don't just disagree, you get furious.
You will react with sudden, flashing anger or deep, brooding resentment. You will immediately try to discredit the person offering the feedback, rather than examining the feedback itself.
So if my heart rate spikes, I'm talking over my co-host, and I feel a sudden urge to burn the studio down because someone suggested a tiny edit to my script, I have taken a sip from the drink me bottle.
But here's where I want to clarify something, because the text makes a very specific distinction. It doesn't say all ambition is a disease. It separates fantastical grandiosity from practical grandiosity. If I'm reading this right, is practical grandiosity just having a massive ego, but actually doing the hard work to back it up?
Not quite. That is a common misinterpretation. In practical grandiosity, the ego does not become massive. The ambition becomes massive, but the ego remains tightly tethered to the ground. Fantastical grandiosity is fueled by delusion, it craves unearned attention, it demands respect simply for existing, and it relies on a complete disconnect from the gritty reality of execution. Like, I'm a visionary, I don't do details.
Exactly. Practical grandiosity, on the other hand, is when you take that intense, burning, almost irrational energy, that primal desire to achieve something monumental, and you channel it directly into rigorous, exhausting work. You use the desire for greatness as the fuel to push past your physical and mental limits, to solve agonizingly complex problems, and to contribute something tangible and lasting to society. You don't demand respect. You demand excellence from yourself.
It's the difference between declaring yourself a revolutionary architect because you sketched a cool building on a napkin versus locking yourself in a room for 7 years, studying structural engineering, fighting with city planners, and actually building the skyscraper.
Precisely. Practical grandiosity uses the energy of the gods to do the labor of a mortal. Your self-esteem is raised, absolutely, but it is anchored to real achievements and the demonstrable mastery of your craft, not to subjective, fragile fantasies of superiority.
And Greene links the resolution of this back to Freud, to this concept of the oceanic feeling. Instead of trying to get the infant's magic wand back by dominating everyone around us, we can find that deep, universe-bending connection through healthy avenues.
Yes. Sigmund Freud described the oceanic feeling as a sensation of eternity, a feeling of being completely unified with the external world as a whole. It is, chemically and psychologically, a replication of that lost infantile connection with the mother. But instead of achieving it through regression and ego inflation, a healthy adult can achieve it through entering a state of deep, uninterrupted flow in their work.
Like when you're just totally in the zone.
When you are so focused on a complex task that the boundary between you and the work dissolves, you experience the oceanic feeling. You can also achieve it through profound empathy, truly connecting with the suffering or joy of another human being. You satisfy the primal urge to transcend your isolated existence, but you do it by connecting to reality rather than floating above it.
So we deflate the balloon of the ego and we channel that massive energy into the work itself. That brings us to a fascinating transition, because the massive ego is just one mask we wear to hide our vulnerability. But there is another, even more restrictive identity we force ourselves into, one that literally chops our psychological potential in half. And that brings us to the law of gender rigidity.
This is arguably one of the most profound and misunderstood frameworks in the source material. The core psychological concept here is the lost twin. We have to understand that genetically, and through the intense early exposure to both our mother and our father, Every single human being possesses both masculine and feminine psychological qualities, entirely regardless of their biological sex.
But society doesn't like that complexity. Society likes clean labels.
Exactly. As we grow, peer pressure, societal expectations, and our own desperate need to present a consistent, easily categorizable identity to the world force us to make a choice. We begin to actively repress, deny, and bury the qualities within us that do not align with our prescribed biological gender role. We essentially lock half of our natural character in the basement.
The analogy I use for this is aviation. Imagine you were given a state-of-the-art twin-engine fighter jet. It is capable of incredible maneuvers, but to prove to everyone on the runway that you fit a specific stereotype, you intentionally shut down the left engine. You fly your entire life relying only on the right engine, fighting the drag, struggling to maintain altitude just to prove a point. It is a staggering act of self-mutilation. You are intentionally diminishing your own power.
It is a massive, exhausting handicap. And to understand the mechanics of this repression, we have to look at the work of Carl Jung. Jung theorized that these repressed masculine or feminine qualities do not simply vanish into the ether. They coalesce in the unconscious mind to form an active, dynamic entity. For biological males, Jung called this repressed feminine entity the anima. For biological females, he called the repressed masculine entity the animus.
And Jung didn't just view these as passive concepts. He believed these repressed entities actively possess us, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we fall in love. I think this is the most mind-blowing concept in the whole duck dive. Let's unpack this.
It fundamentally changes how you view romantic infatuation. When we fall deeply irrationally in love with someone, Jung argues that we are rarely seeing the actual flawed human being in front of us. What is actually happening mechanically is a phenomenon of projection.
So we aren't seeing them at all.
No. We are taking our own repressed anima, or animus, that lost twin we locked in the basement, and we are projecting it entirely onto the other person. We are mesmerized by them because they seem to perfectly embody the exact emotional or structural qualities we have denied in ourselves.
You aren't falling in love with them. You are falling in love with the missing half of your own soul pasted over their face. That is wild.
Precisely. And that is exactly why those highly infatuated relationships can become incredibly volatile and deeply disappointing. Eventually, the reality of the actual human being clashes with the perfect, godlike projection of the anima or animus you've placed on them. The mask slips, the projection shatters, and the infatuation turns to resentment.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here because we are wading into tricky territory. If I go into the office tomorrow and start telling my team that we need to utilize masculine and feminine styles of thinking, isn't that just reinforcing incredibly toxic, outdated stereotypes? Aren't we supposed to be moving past the idea that logic is for men and empathy is for women?
That is a vital distinction to make, and it is where many people misunderstand the psychology. Jung and Greene are not talking about modern social politics, and they are certainly not saying these traits belong exclusively to one biological sex. They're talking about universal psychological energies and archetypal frameworks that exist within every single brain.
So it's about energy, not biology.
Exactly. The writer Susan Sontag captured the essence of this beautifully when she observed, "What is most beautiful in virile men is something feminine. What is most beautiful in feminine women is something masculine." We are discussing energetic spectrums that we all have access to.
Okay, so let's make it concrete. If we divorce it from biology, what does a masculine energy style versus a feminine energy style actually look like in practice? How do they function as tools?
Let's look at it across three domains: thinking, self-assessment, and leadership. In the domain of thinking, the masculine energy style leans heavily toward the focused, the structural, and the intensely analytical. It excels in compartmentalizing data and boring deeply into a singular, isolated problem.
Like a laser beam.
Yes. The feminine energy style, conversely, leans toward the wide, the associative, and the holistic. It excels at seeing the invisible connections between seemingly disparate ideas and understanding the broader context of a system. To achieve true genius in any field, you cannot rely on just one, you must integrate both.
What about self-assessment?
In self-assessment, the masculine tendency when faced with failure is to project outward blaming market conditions, bad luck, or incompetent subordinates. The feminine tendency is to turn inward, immediately asking, "What did I do wrong?" and often absorbing an unhealthy amount of personal blame.
And leadership, that's the big one.
In leadership, the masculine style relies heavily on rigid hierarchy, strict chains of command, and cold, results-driven metrics, often utilizing fear or absolute discipline to maintain order. The feminine leadership style relies on empathy, fluid cooperation, lateral communication, and building a deeply unified team spirit to achieve goals.
So mechanically, if I'm a CEO and I only ever use the masculine leadership style, strict hierarchy, fear, and metrics, my company might be highly efficient for a year, but eventually it will become brittle. The culture will turn toxic, turnover will skyrocket, and innovation will die because everyone is too afraid to associate widely.
They'll be paralyzed.
But if I can reach into the basement, unlock that lost twin, and integrate the feminine style empathy, lateral cooperation, holistic vision, I don't lose my strength. I suddenly become a vastly more adaptable, powerful, and resilient leader. Both engines are firing.
That is the goal of psychological integration. And the source material is very clear about what happens to people who refuse to integrate. They become absurd caricatures of overcompensation. When you encounter a man who is aggressively, performatively hypermasculine, or a woman who is exaggeratedly, helplessly hyperfeminine, you are not looking at authenticity. You are looking at someone who is deeply unconsciously terrified of their repressed opposite.
They're terrified the basement door is going to open.
And because that repressed energy is trapped under high pressure, it inevitably leaks out in bizarre, contradictory ways.
It's the classic trope of the hyper-rational Stoic philosophy professor who has built his entire 50-year brand on cold masculine logic, and then one day he just completely burns his career and his marriage to the ground by running off in a wildly irrational, emotionally chaotic love affair.
Exactly. His repressed anima, the denied emotional and chaotic energy, finally built up enough pressure to rebel, possess his conscious mind, and destroy the rigid structure he built. This mechanism is exactly what drives the cliché of the midlife crisis. Society assumes a midlife crisis is just a shallow desire to feel young again.
Right, like buying a sports car.
If not, it is the repressed lost twin violently kicking down the basement door. You have played the rigid, one-sided gender role for 20 or 30 years, your psyche is exhausted by the heavy mask, and the buried half of your personality is demanding integration. If you do not integrate it consciously and carefully, it will explode unconsciously and leave a crater in your life.
So the mandate is clear fire up both engines. Have access to the focus structure and the associative empathy. Be fluid. But once you do that, once you stop playing a rigid role, you suddenly have access to this massive humming reserve of psychological energy, which leads us directly into the crisis of Section 4. Because immense energy without a clear vector is just chaos. We have to transition from figuring out who we are to deciding where we are going. We need to combat the law of aimlessness by discovering purpose.
This touches on a profound philosophical concept Greene calls the human predicament. If you look at the animal kingdom, you do not see existential dread. Animals are guided entirely by an airtight system of pure instinct. A migratory bird does not wake up in the morning, stare at the horizon, and suffer a panic attack wondering if it should fly south or maybe take a gap year to find itself.
It just flies south. The instinct provides the absolute vector.
Yes. Humans, however, lack that internal instinctual compass. We're thrust into a ruthless, complex world after a few years of schooling, armed with very little real experience, and faced with a paralyzing infinity of choices.
Without an instinctual vector, we are completely at the mercy of external forces. The analogy here is the difference between living as a pinball versus living as a heat-seeking missile. Most people, if they are honest, live their lives as the pinball. They pull the plunger, launch themselves into the machine of society, and just bounce passively off the bumpers. They get hit by a viral cultural trend, ding, they bounce over and buy a crypto coin. They get hit by their boss's bad mood, ding, they bounce into a depression. It is a reactive, exhausting, deeply anxious way to live, and it leads to total aimless drifting.
And the alternative?
A heat-seeking missile operates on a fundamentally different mechanism. It has an internal guidance system. You can launch it into a hurricane, you can throw chaff in its path, you can put physical obstacles in its way, and it will continuously, ruthlessly correct its own course to lock onto its target.
Developing that internal guidance system relies on distinguishing between two competing frequencies in your mind, the ego voice and the inner voice. The ego voice is the pinball mechanism. It is loud, frantic, and reactive. It demands quick hits of dopamine, it craves constant external validation, it feeds endlessly on your social insecurities, and above all, it wants you to conform to the group so you feel safe.
And the inner voice.
The inner voice, by contrast, operates on a very low, deep frequency. It is connected to your primal inclinations, the specific subjects, tasks, or obsessions you were naturally drawn to as a young child, long before the world told you what was cool or profitable.
When you are operating on the inner voice, the reward is the absorption in the work itself, not the applause it might eventually bring. But let's be incredibly practical here. How do you actually hear a low-frequency whisper when we live in an environment designed to deafen us? Our brains are constantly hijacked by the algorithmic dopamine loops of TikTok, the relentless ping of Slack notifications, and the 247 outrage cycle of the news. The ego voice has a stadium sound system, and the inner voice is whispering from the bottom of a well.
It requires an act of deliberate, almost aggressive psychological quarantine. You cannot passively hope to hear the inner voice. You have to carve out periods of absolute, unbroken silence. You have to physically and digitally distance yourself from the gravitational pull of your peer group.
Which is so hard to do now.
It's agonizing, but necessary. You must engage in deep introspection, looking back at your childhood, to identify the specific activities that induced a state of flow, where you lost track of time. And crucially, you have to be brutally, painfully honest with yourself about the false purposes you are currently chasing.
The false purposes. This is where the ego runs its most brilliant con. It says, look, I have a purpose, I'm highly motivated, but the motivation is entirely superficial. Chasing money as an end goal, pursuing pure pleasure, seeking fame, or even joining a radical political cause just to feel the intoxicating high of belonging to a mob.
Those are false purposes because they are entirely externally dependent. If your ultimate purpose is simply to accumulate wealth, there will inevitably be someone with more, which instantly triggers the toxic envy we discussed in Section 1. If your purpose is joining a cause primarily to soothe your loneliness, you will fall victim to the crushing conformity we will discuss next. A true purpose must originate from within, and it must make you psychologically self-reliant.
The source material provides what I think is the most brilliant, unexpected case study for this concept. Martin Luther King Jr., usually, when history books discuss MLK, they focus entirely on the moral arc, the dream, the soaring rhetoric. But Greene analyzes him through a completely different lens. He looks at MLK purely as a master strategist wielding the supreme tactical power of a singular purpose.
It is a masterclass in strategic discipline under unimaginable pressure. When MLK emerged as the leader of the civil rights movement, the reality for Black Americans in the Jim Crow South was one of horrific, entrenched systemic violence. The natural, completely understandable, instinctual reaction for many in the movement was to lash out in pure righteous anger, or to attempt to meet the violence of the state with armed resistance.
Which is the ego voice reacting directly to immense pain.
Exactly. But MLK had cultivated a profound connection to his inner voice, his higher calling, which provided him with a cold, clear, strategic vector.
He realized that pure reactive anger, while completely morally justified, was tactically a false purpose. It wouldn't achieve the goal.
Right. He understood the raw mechanics of the power dynamic. If the movement reacted with violence, it would play directly into the hands of the white power structure, which controlled the police, the courts, and the military. They would use any violence as the ultimate excuse to crush the movement with overwhelming, lethal force. MLK didn't just react to the bumpers of the pinball machine. He sought leverage.
He weaponized the media, didn't he?
His purpose gave him the clarity to see that the only path to victory was to maximize the economic and psychological pain for the oppressors, while strictly denying them the justification for a massacre. He orchestrated highly disciplined sit-ins and boycotts. He intentionally and strategically placed nonviolent protesters in environments where he knew the notoriously brutal police forces would overreact.
He baited them into exposing their own brutality.
Yes. By doing so, he brought the ugly, undeniable reality of the segregated South directly into the living rooms of white Northern Americans via the evening news broadcasts. He essentially bypassed the local political structure and targeted the conscience and the political anxiety of the entire nation.
And the level of psychological discipline required to maintain that strategy is staggering. He had younger, highly militant factions within his own coalition screaming at him daily. They called him weak, they called him an accommodationist, they urged him to abandon nonviolence. But because his mind was operating as a heat-seeking missile locked onto a massive long-term purpose, he was completely immune to the petty criticisms of his own allies. He didn't bounce off their bumpers, he absorbed the friction and maintained absolute group unity.
That is the ultimate, tangible value of discovering a true calling. It provides you with what Greene defines as the armor of purpose. When you possess absolute clarity on your mission, the daily friction of life, the insults, the minor setbacks, the chaotic moods of your coworkers, they simply fail to penetrate. You develop an almost superhuman resilience. Greene quotes the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche here, and it perfectly encapsulates the mechanics of purpose. He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow.
He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. If the vector is strong enough, the turbulence doesn't matter. So, let's look at the journey. You've done the grueling internal work. You've spotted the carbon monoxide of your envy. You've popped the delusional balloon of your grandiosity. You've integrated the lost tween of your masculine and feminine energies. And you've built your heat-seeking missile of purpose. You are locked, loaded, and ready to launch.
But the journey isn't over.
No. Because what happens the exact moment that missile leaves the silo and enters the massive, mind-bending gravitational field of a giant planet? That planet is the group. And that brings us to our final frontier, the law of conformity.
This is arguably the most difficult psychological law to master because combating it requires fighting against our deepest evolutionary survival instincts. At our core, we are pack animals. When you are sitting alone in your room, reading a book, you possess your individual personality. You are rational, you have nuanced opinions, but the very second you step into a group dynamic, whether that is a corporate boardroom, a political rally, a tight-knit friend group, or even logging onto a highly polarized social media platform, a profound psychological shift occurs. You unconsciously, automatically adopt a completely different persona, the social personality.
The metaphor I originally thought of for this was a zombie virus. You walk into the office, you get bitten, and suddenly you are mindlessly mourning the exact same opinions as the horde. But that implies a sort of clumsy, brain-dead stumbling. The reality Greene describes is much more precise and terrifying. It's not zombies, it's a flock of starlings. Or a room full of synchronized metronomes.
Metronomes are a great visual.
Right. You walk into the room with your own rhythm, but the sheer invisible anxiety of standing out causes your brain to automatically adjust your frequency to match the collective. You don't even realize you're altering your own tempo.
That is a much more accurate visualization of the mechanism, which psychologists call emotional contagion. Deep within our primitive brain, being ostracized from the group meant death on the savannah. So when we enter a group, we experience an undercurrent of unconscious anxiety. We desperately need to signal that we belong. Mechanically, our mirror neurons fire up.
We physically start copying them.
We automatically begin to physically imitate the posture and facial expressions of the dominant figures in the room. We subconsciously sand down the edges of our beliefs to seamlessly fit the group's accepted orthodoxy. And most dangerously, the presence of the group dilutes our sense of personal, individual consequence. We engage in riskier, more aggressive, or more irrational behaviors than we ever would in isolation, driven by the illusion that, well, everyone else is doing it, so the risk is distributed.
Greene breaks this down into the mechanics of the hive. Every hive has unspoken codes. You know exactly what this is if you've ever started a new corporate job. HR hands you the official, glossy employee handbook on day one, but within a week, you realize there is a shadow rule book that actually governs survival.
Always.
Never bring up the Q3 losses to the VP. We all pretend to love the CEO's terrible golf stories. Those are the sacred cows.
The unspoken rules are the true connective tissue of the hive. And as any group expands beyond a certain size, a very predictable, highly destructive structural dynamic takes hold, the inevitable formation of factions.
Why does that always happen? Why can't a company of 1,000 people just maintain a unified, collaborative culture? Why does it always devolve into turf wars between marketing and engineering?
It connects directly back to the narcissism we discussed. In a massive group, the individual feels fundamentally insignificant. Your ego is starving for recognition. To soothe that anxiety and get a narcissistic boost, you unconsciously seek out a smaller, more exclusive clique within the larger ecosystem, a faction of people who share your specific grievances, your departmental background, or your worldview.
So it's about feeling special again.
Exactly. By belonging to this smaller, tightly bound faction, you instantly create an us versus them dynamic. It is a highly effective way to artificially inflate your status by looking down on the other factions.
And the most toxic faction in any hive is always the elite faction, the inner circle at the very top. They write the mission statements, they preach endlessly about company values and sacrificing for the greater good. But structurally, the elite faction exists for one primary purpose: to bend or break the rules to protect its own members and maintain its monopoly on power.
And to fully comprehend the apocalyptic potential of this group dynamic when it is intentionally manipulated, Greene provides the ultimate, chilling case study: Mao Zedong and the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Mao was a supreme, terrifying architect of the hive mind.
Again, viewing this purely through the lens of strategic psychology and mechanics. How did Mao manipulate the metronomes? What was the exact mechanism he used?
In the mid-1960s, Mao recognized that he was slowly losing his absolute grip on the Communist Party apparatus to factions that were slightly more moderate and pragmatic. He needed a mechanism to shatter those factions and reassert total godlike dominance. He realized he could not do this through the normal bureaucratic channel, so he bypassed the adult party structure entirely and appealed directly to the youth of China, millions of high school and university students.
Which is brilliant, darkly, because teenagers are the most susceptible to group contagion.
Mao understood a fundamental law of group dynamics.
Yeah.
To forge an unbreakable, fanatic group unity, you must provide them with a terrifying enemy.
He gave them a bogeyman to focus the heat-seeking missile.
He pointed the massive, chaotic energy of the youth at a vague but legitimate-sounding enemy revisionists and capitalist roaders. He claimed these were authority figures, teachers, local leaders, parents who were secretly clinging to old bourgeois traditions and holding the country back.
He weaponized adolescent rebellion.
By doing this, Mao weaponized the natural biological adolescent drive to rebel against authority, and he strapped it to the nuclear engine of group emotional contagion.
He essentially told millions of teenagers, your teenage angst is actually a holy war and I am giving you permission to destroy the adults. That is terrifying. And the resulting cultural revolution was a masterclass in manufactured group madness. The emotional contagion reached a fever pitch. Students publicly humiliated and tortured their teachers. Children turned their own parents over to tribunals. The group dynamic became a runaway, self-sustaining cyclone of paranoia, performative purity, and absolute terrified conformity to Mao's ideology. Centuries of cultural heritage were smashed to pieces. By manipulating the social personality of millions, Mao completely shattered his political rivals and solidified his unquestionable supremacy, utilizing the exact mechanics of the hive we just discussed.
It is the ultimate, horrifying extreme of the synchronized metronomes. And it brings us to a massive practical paradox for our listeners today. The philosopher Eric Hoffer summarized this perfectly when he wrote, "When people are free to do as they please, they usually imitate each other."
It's a brilliant observation.
So, we know the gravity of the group pulls us down into mediocrity or madness. We know conformity is an intellectual trap. But unless we plan on moving to a cabin in the woods and living totally off the grid, we have to interact with groups. We have to work in corporations, navigate families, and exist in society. So how do we perform this delicate dance? How do we appear to be cooperative, highly functioning team players while secretly maintaining a psychological hazmat suit around our independent minds?
The antidote to the toxic hive is what Greene defines as the reality group. If a toxic group is built on managing fragile egos, enforcing unspoken social codes, and playing Machiavellian political games, a reality group is tethered exclusively and ruthlessly to actual measurable results. It is a highly functional team where the collective focus is aimed entirely at the work itself, rather than the internal status dynamics.
So, if the toxic group is a flock of starlings blindly following the bird in front of them, a reality group is a jazz ensemble. Everyone in a jazz quartet is playing a distinct, unique instrument. Everyone has spent thousands of hours mastering their own individual sound. They maintain their fierce independence.
They don't copy each other.
No. But when they play together, they are hyper-attuned to the collective rhythm. They are listening intensely to each other, supporting the soloist, and creating a complex harmony that is vastly greater than the sum of its parts, all without ever surrendering their individuality.
That is a perfect structural analogy. In a reality group, diverse, conflicting opinions are not viewed as a threat to the hierarchy. They are demanded as a necessary tool for solving complex problems. To understand how to build a reality group, you have to study leaders who actively and intentionally destroyed the court cocoon. The court cocoon is that insulating bubble of sycophants and yes-men that naturally forms around any powerful leader, feeding them only the sanitized information they want to hear.
Napoleon Bonaparte was obsessed with destroying the cocoon, right?
Yes. Napoleon understood that if he relied solely on the polished reports of his generals and top lieutenants, he would be making decisions based on political fiction. The generals would hide their failures and exaggerate their successes. So Napoleon routinely bypassed the entire chain of command.
He just ignored his top guys.
He would ride out and speak directly to the lowest-ranking foot soldiers, the scouts, and the supply clerks on the front lines. He demanded the raw, unfiltered, gritty reality of the situation. He used that raw data to make his brilliant, highly adaptable strategic maneuvers. He forced his army to operate as a reality group.
And Greene uses a modern example that I absolutely love, Phil Jackson, the legendary coach of the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers.
Phil Jackson is a phenomenal case study in neutralizing group contagion. The standard operating procedure for a sports coach is to rely on massive emotional spikes. They give angry, screaming locker room speeches to hype the team up, which relies entirely on the volatile, unpredictable energy of group contagion.
Like getting the metronome spinning as fast as possible.
Jackson realized that emotional spikes inevitably lead to emotional crashes. Instead, he taught his teams, which were filled with highly individualistic, often clashing superstars, Zen meditation and mindfulness. He actively worked to keep their baseline deeply calm. He wanted them operating with cold, clear minds, entirely focused on the intricate reality of the game unfolding on the court, completely insulated from the toxic emotional swings of the screaming crowd or the opposing team's provocations. He built an elite reality group by killing the emotional contagion.
Okay, I am looking at the clock and I need to initiate a dopamine cooldown sequence because we have just sprinted through an absolute gauntlet of psychological warfare today. Let's recap exactly what we've unpacked, what we've seen through our night vision goggles. We analyzed the biological threat response of envy, learning to spot the venom hiding in microexpressions, and the sabotage of the insecure master.
We explored the infantile roots of grandiosity.
Right, and how to tether our massive ambition to the reality of the work. We learned how to stop flying with one engine, integrating the lost twin of our masculine and feminine energies. We studied the strategic genius of MLK to understand how a heat-seeking purpose makes us immune to friction. And finally, we dissected the mechanics of the hive mind, learning how to build a jazz ensemble rather than joining a flock of starlings.
It is an immense, heavy amount of psychological material to process, but every single law we discussed today connects back to one central, empowering theme: conscious awareness. When you are blind to these deeply ingrained evolutionary forces, you are a puppet reacting to strings. When you see the mechanics clearly, you have the opportunity to take the strings into your own hands.
So, to you, the listener, I have a direct challenge for you. Tomorrow morning, when you walk into your office or when you log onto that Zoom call, put the goggles on. Do not react. Just observe. View your daily interactions through this new, highly cinematic lens. Watch for the subtle fraction of a second tightening in a coworker's jaw. Notice who is suddenly talking the loudest and fastest when their project is questioned. Feel the subtle, invisible gravitational pull of the room trying to pressure you into agreeing with a consensus you know is flawed. Just watch the matrix run.
And as you observe that matrix, I want to leave you with one final complex concept to mull over. Throughout this entire final section, we have framed the social personality and the mask we wear in groups as something inherently dangerous, a force that drags us down into mediocrity. But what if we challenge that assumption? What if we flip the perspective entirely?
Okay, I'm listening. Where are we going with this?
What if, by fully comprehending the intricate machinery of human nature, by rigorously mastering your own fragile ego, consciously integrating your lost twin, and locking onto your internal purpose, you can actually harness the group's massive energy instead of being consumed by it? What if ultimate individual freedom is not found by retreating to a cabin in the woods, or by constantly aggressively rebelling against the hive? What if true freedom is found by mastering your role within the group so perfectly, with such supreme detached skill, that the social mask actually becomes your ultimate tool? By playing the social game with total conscious awareness, you can elevate the people around you, guide the rhythm of the jazz ensemble, and create that profound oceanic feeling of connection and flow. Not through mindless submission to the group, but through absolute conscious mastery of reality.
So the goal isn't just to see the x-ray of the broken bones. The goal is to use that vision to become the surgeon, to play your instrument with such undeniable magnetic mastery that the rest of the room naturally, willingly falls into your rhythm. That is an incredible paradigm shift. And that pursuit of ultimate mastery is exactly what we are going to explore in our fourth and final deep dive next time. Until then, keep the goggles on and keep your eyes wide open. So, in 1665, the bubonic plague hit London. And this really strange, almost unbelievable psychological phenomenon.
So like the plague years, yeah, it was wild.
Right. Literally overnight, centuries of entrenched class warfare, violent religious hatred between Catholics and Protestants, and bitter, petty neighborhood tribalism completely vanished.
Just completely wiped out by the crisis.
Exactly. People who would have happily killed each other a week prior were suddenly looking at one another with, profound, unvarnished empathy.
Which is such a crazy shift.
It really really is. And it begs this deeply uncomfortable question, like, why did it take literal carts of bodies rolling through the cobblestone streets to create the ultimate state of human connection?
It's a dark thought, but yeah.
Today, we are staring directly into that void. We are looking at the final, most terrifying, and ultimately most liberating mechanisms of the human mind.
And we are really arriving at the grand finale of this massive architectural teardown of human nature based on our source material.
The final boss level.
Yes, exactly. If you visualize the journey we've taken through these texts, we started in, the claustrophobic, treacherous rooms of our own interpersonal relationships.
Right. Decoding masks, navigating fragile egos.
Right. But today, the camera pulls way back. We're transitioning from those localized battlegrounds to the sweeping, invisible tides of historical time.
And finally, we are going to stand at the very edge of human existence and confront the ultimate deadline.
The stakes literally could not be higher.
They really couldn't. So our mission today is to decode the final 4 laws from the text. We're sprinting through the hidden tripwires of leadership, the dark, highly sophisticated arts of human aggression.
Which is a fascinating section, by the way.
Oh, it blew my mind. Plus, the invisible matrix of generational programming that you, the listener, are currently trapped in without even realizing it.
And of course, the concept of death denial.
Right. So, to the listener, if you have ever felt betrayed by a group of people you poured your heart into leading, or, I don't know, blindsided by a smiling colleague's invisible sabotage.
We've all been there.
Exactly. Or if you've felt deeply alienated by the sheer foreignness of a different generation, or laid awake paralyzed by a 3 a.m. existential dread, this deep dive is going to hand you the structural blueprints to dismantle those anxieties.
It's the ultimate cheat code.
Yeah.
But, to navigate the world, you first have to lead it.
And that could mean leading a multinational corporation, leading a family unit, or fundamentally just leading yourself.
Right, and the text completely shatters our modern, sanitized view of leadership. It reveals that the very foundation of authority is built on this volatile, highly dangerous paradox.
The rubber band of dependency. I love this analogy.
It's so accurate. The text points out that as human beings, we possess a desperate, primal craving for a leader.
Because when a group is leaderless, it descends into chaotic anxiety, right? Competing agendas just paralyze everyone.
Exactly. We want a parental figure to step in, absorb that anxiety, and point the way forward. But the absolute second someone actually steps up and claims that authority,
The psychology of the group violently flips.
it really does. The resentment instantly takes root. Think of the rubber band analogy. A group pulls a leader in tightly because they need the security and structure that person provides.
Right, but the tighter they pull that leader in, the more the leader's authority stretches against the group's individual autonomy.
Yes. Tension builds. Suddenly, the followers feel small. They feel restricted.
Because being managed triggers these deeply buried childhood rebellions against parental control.
Precisely. The group wants to worship the king for the safety he provides, but they simultaneously harbor this subconscious urge to kill the king to regain their freedom.
Wow.
So they begin to scrutinize the leader's every single micro-expression, just hunting for hypocrisy, weakness, or entitlement.
Okay, let's unpack this with a visual. Imagine leadership not as a throne, but as a tightrope suspended over a pit of hungry wolves.
That is a terrifying but very accurate mental image.
Right. The moment you lean back, put your feet on the desk, and radiate this energy of like, I have arrived, I am entitled to your respect because of my title, the rubber band snaps.
And the wolves smell blood.
Exactly. And the sources draw a brilliant razor-sharp distinction here between the modern illusion of authority and true structural authority.
Because we tend to confuse authority with dominance or volume or like a follower count today. We think it's about forcing compliance.
But the Latin root of the word completely exposes the lie in that modern definition, doesn't it?
It does. The word auctoritas doesn't mean to dominate or diminish. It translates to increase or augment.
I love that. To increase.
Right. True authority is the act of enlarging the people around you, elevating their sense of purpose, and making them feel more capable in your presence.
It is a grueling, relentless daily practice of empathy and vision. And the text holds up Queen Elizabeth I as the absolute masterclass in walking this psychological tightrope.
Oh, she's a perfect example.
You look at her situation in the 16th century, and it's a miracle she survived a week, let alone decades.
Totally.
She is a woman surrounded by incredibly ambitious, hyper-masculine, deeply patriarchal ministers who are constantly doubting her legitimacy.
And If she had demanded their respect based purely on, the divine right of her crown, they would have actively conspired to destroy her.
They would have torn her apart.
Absolutely. But she understood the fickleness of the court perfectly. She adopted the exact opposite posture of entitlement.
She operated on the assumption that she had to re-earn her right to lead every single morning.
Yes, she outworked her ministers. She read every dispatch. She mastered the nuances of foreign policy so deeply that she routinely embarrassed her own advisors with her geopolitical recall.
That is amazing.
And most importantly, she demonstrated through agonizing personal sacrifices that her primary obsession wasn't her own fragile ego.
It was the survival and glory of England. She absorbed the danger for them.
Exactly.
But I want to push back on this, though, because everything we are taught about modern corporate culture completely contradicts this 16th century monarch model.
That's very true.
Like, the prevailing management theory today is the friendly boss, the flat hierarchy.
We're all family here vibe.
Right. We are told to sit on beanbags, use first names, treat our employees like peers, and, build absolute consensus before making a move. It feels vastly more humane.
It does feel more humane on the surface.
So are the sources genuinely arguing that this modern empathetic archetype is actually a failure?
The text argues it is one of the most dangerous traps a leader can fall into.
Wait, really? The whole "I'm just your buddy" leadership style is a trap?
A massive one. Because it fundamentally misreads human psychology. The buddy-boss dynamic actually generates profound subterranean anxiety within a group.
Because no one knows who's actually driving the bus.
Exactly. It is, at its core, an abdication of responsibility. When a crisis hits or a hard pivot is required, people do not want a friend.
They want a captain.
They want a captain who is willing to shoulder the terrifying weight of a final decision. This modern flattening dynamic where parents try to be best friends with their teenagers or CEOs try to act like entry-level peers usually stems from the leader's own fear.
Fear of standing out and being a target for the group's ambivalence.
Precisely. By refusing to claim the auctoritas, the leader allows the chaotic, competing agendas to creep back in. The followers feel adrift.
So the friendly boss is actually creating the exact chaos they're trying to avoid by being nice. That is insane.
It's totally counterintuitive, but it happens every day.
How, then, do you establish this true authority without reverting to being a screaming tyrant, but also without collapsing into the beanbag buddy trap?
It requires a highly calibrated set of strategies. The foundational piece is the convergence of vision and tone.
Meaning you have to lead from the front, taking on the heaviest burdens first.
Right. You do not manage via angry emails sent from a corner office. If the team has to work through the weekend, you are the first one in the building and the last one to leave.
Your tone-like, the relentless, quiet standard of excellence you hold yourself to, exerts a magnetic pull.
Yes. You don't have to yell at people to work harder. Your sheer output shames them into elevating their own performance.
You engage their willpower so deeply that they actively desire to follow you rather than feeling forced.
Exactly. You become an archetype, like the deliverer think Moses or Martin Luther King Jr., who unites people against a shared obstacle.
Okay, and the second strategy the text outlines is where it gets slightly more Machiavellian, but the psychology is undeniable, the aura and the taboo.
Yes, the aura is fascinating. Maintaining an aura requires deliberate emotional discipline.
Because if you overshare every passing anxiety, if you are entirely predictable, you erode the group's respect.
You do. You need to cultivate a slight calculated distance. You send mixed, intriguing signals.
Like, you can be incredibly demanding and rigorous, but follow up with a moment of startling, laser-focused empathy regarding an employee's personal life.
Right. This unpredictability makes the group think about you constantly. They're continuously trying to solve the puzzle of your expectations.
And the taboo is the absolute uncrossable line. Never, under any circumstances, take away a privilege, a resource, or a comfort that the group already believes they own.
This taps into the cognitive bias of loss aversion.
Which is that human beings feel the pain of losing something twice as powerfully as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Exactly. If you take away their flexible hours, a minor stipend, or even just a preferred seating arrangement, you trigger a massive, disproportionate wave of insecurity.
They will view you as a thief of their autonomy.
And they will question your legitimacy in perpetuity. Every structural change you implement must be cognitively framed as an opportunity for them to gain a new advantage, never a reduction of their current state.
It all circles back to the ultimate prize the text builds toward in this section, which is inner authority.
Because you cannot possibly hope to manage the volatile rubber band of a group's dependency if you are entirely unmanaged within yourself.
Right. Every human being possesses a lower, primitive self. The voice that craves immediate gratification, avoids difficult conversations, and seeks the path of least resistance.
An inner authority is the cultivation of a quiet, unyielding, commanding voice that sets an uncompromising standard for your own behavior, relying on your higher self.
The text's exploration of Leonardo da Vinci perfectly crystallizes this. He operated with a personal motto, ostinato rigor, relentless rigor.
Which is amazing considering his background. He was the illegitimate son of a notary. He was barred from the prestigious universities.
Right, he had no formal classical education in Latin or mathematics, no demanding taskmaster forcing him to study.
His authority was entirely self-generated. Nobody forced Da Vinci to perfect his art.
When he wanted to understand how a human smile worked for the Mona Lisa, nobody told him to go to a morgue at midnight.
He commanded himself to do it. He peeled back the skin of human cadavers, tracing the exact musculature of the lips and cheeks.
He commanded himself to sit by rivers for hundreds of hours, sketching the complex fluid dynamics of water currents. The friction he pushed against wasn't external management, it was the limits of his own mastery.
And when a person possesses that density of inner authority, it radiates outward. People instinctively defer to them.
But, and this is but mastering your inner authority and leading with vision does not insulate you from the world.
Not at all.
You can be the most perfectly calibrated leader on earth, and you will still face individuals who are driven to tear you down. Which brings us to a sharp pivot in the text.
Moving from the nuances of leadership straight into the dark, primal machinery of Chapter 16, the law of aggression.
The smiling assassin. I loved this chapter.
It is brilliant. This chapter completely dismantles the most comforting, socially acceptable delusion we hold about ourselves.
The myth of the peaceful human.
Yes. We eagerly divide the world into two camps. There are the aggressors, the criminals, the tyrannical dictators, the toxic bullies.
And then there is us, the civilized, peaceful, rational pacifists. Here's where it gets really interesting. We love to think other people are the aggressors, but we all have this drive.
We are all on the exact same aggression spectrum. The word itself comes from the Latin aggressio, which simply means to step forward.
So anytime you attempt to assert your will, anytime you try to alter your environment to suit your preferences, negotiate a better salary, or even subtly pressure your partner to fold the laundry differently,
You are channeling aggressive energy. It is the fundamental drive to exert control over an unpredictable reality.
what is vital to understand is the psychological root of this drive. We mistakenly associate aggression with innate malice or evil.
But the text reveals that chronic aggression almost always stems from a profound, deep-seated well of anxiety and helplessness.
As humans, we are acutely aware of our vulnerability. The world is chaotic, it's indifferent, it's dangerous.
And to numb that terrifying vulnerability, we try to control our immediate surroundings.
So when a highly aggressive individual feels their control slipping, their underlying anxiety spikes into a blinding panic.
Which manifests outward as rage or manipulation.
And the most lethal predators in the modern world are not the people screaming and throwing coffee cups in the boardroom. Those people are easy to spot and avoid.
Right, the text introduces the archetype of the sophisticated aggressor.
Yeah.
And it paints this chilling portrait of John D. Rockefeller to illustrate how this works.
Rockefeller is the apex predator of sophisticated aggression. He never brawled. He never raised his voice.
He was unfailingly polite, devoutly religious, and maintained a demeanor of complete, eerie calm.
But his internal need to completely dominate the oil industry was absolute. He understood that raw, overt aggression creates massive resistance, so he cloaked his maneuvers.
He played on emotions. The way he handled his early rivals, Clark, Scott, and Benson, is terrifying. He didn't threaten them.
He used silence and the manipulation of time.
Exactly. He would sit in negotiations, completely silent, allowing the uncomfortable void to force his rivals to keep talking.
So they would inadvertently reveal their anxieties and over-negotiate against themselves.
Yes. And more effectively, he manufactured artificial deadlines. He would orchestrate behind-the-scenes pressure, creating an illusion of impending financial doom.
And then he'd present a buyout offer that expired in 24 hours. He deliberately restricted their emotional bandwidth.
He induced panic, forcing them to make highly irrational, fear-based decisions to escape the anxiety he has secretly engineered.
The analogy here isn't a tiger leaping out of the jungle. You can fight a tiger. You can see the claws.
Dealing with a sophisticated aggressor like Rockefeller is like waking up in a locked room with a boa constrictor.
Yes. The constrictor doesn't use venom. It doesn't move fast. It just waits until you exhale, and then it imperceptibly tightens its coils.
It restricts your oxygen,
Right.
which in the corporate world is your time, your capital, and your mental clarity.
They manufacture subtle crises, they rush you, they confuse you, until you are so starved for cognitive air that surrendering to their terms feels like a relief.
They win by exhausting your capacity to resist.
It's terrifying, and if Rockefeller is the apex predator, the text introduces an even more insidious, pervasive form of this drive, passive aggression.
The shadow war.
Right. This is the realm of people who possess the exact same desire for control, but lack the courage or the structural power to engage in direct, overt confrontation.
So they wage a guerrilla war of plausible deniability.
Reading this section is like reading a psychiatric breakdown of every maddening office dynamic in existence. The text categorizes these strategies with brutal clarity. Let's start with the subtle superiority strategy.
Ah, yes. The individual who is chronically pathologically late.
They never explicitly state that they believe they are more important than you.
No, they always arrive with a perfectly constructed, logically flawless excuse about traffic or an urgent email.
But the psychological reality is that they are seizing control of the schedule.
Exactly. They're forcing you to wait in a state of suspended animation, subtly reinforcing that their time dictates your reality.
Then there is the blame shifter. This is the person where you confront them with a totally objective, documented failure. Like, you didn't send the client the report on Tuesday?
And instead of answering this statement, they execute this linguistic judo.
I didn't realize you were going to micromanage my every move while I'm dealing with a family health issue.
Suddenly, the structural reality of the missing report vanishes, and you are dragged into an emotional debate about your lack of empathy.
You end up apologizing to the person who failed to do their job.
It creates massive cognitive dissonance in the victim.
And finally, the dependency strategy. The colleague or partner who makes themselves utterly indispensable to your life, but simultaneously projects an aura of constant, overwhelming helplessness.
They require endless emotional support, constant reassurance, and frequent bailouts.
They control you not by dominating you, but by becoming a heavy, fragile anchor that you are terrified to drop.
It's incredibly draining. But the text provides a defensive blueprint against this. The story of the brilliant psychotherapist Milton Erickson is the ultimate countermeasure.
I love this example. So Erickson's handling of passive aggression relies on entirely short-circuiting the aggressor's expected reward loop.
Right. Erickson had a medical student named Anne. She was highly intelligent, but she was waging a relentless passive-aggressive war against him by arriving chronically, disruptively late to his deeply respected seminars.
Now, if Erickson had pulled her aside and yelled at her, he would have lost.
Completely. She was baiting him. She wanted the confrontation.
If he exploded, she could instantly adopt the role of the victim, claiming he was an unstable, tyrannical professor picking on a stressed student. She would win the moral high ground.
Precisely. Passive aggression relies on the target providing a predictable emotional reaction. Erickson refused to provide the fuel.
He used a technique called paradoxical intervention. He didn't get angry.
Instead, he meticulously arranged a scenario where he controlled the timing. He scheduled a private meeting, kept her waiting just long enough to build her anticipation of a scolding.
And then, when she finally entered, he didn't attack. He delivered a highly confusing, deeply ironic, perfectly calm apology.
He apologized to her for his apparent failure to structure the class in a way that accommodated her schedule.
It's brilliant because it completely scrambles her defensive radar. She walked in with her shield up, ready for a fight, and he essentially handed her a bouquet of profoundly sarcastic flowers.
By taking the blame in such an exaggerated, calm manner, he highlighted the absurdity of her behavior.
He induced a deep, burning sense of shame and confusion within her, without ever raising his voice or validating her victim complex. He disarmed her by refusing to play the role she had cast him in.
He mirrored the aggression perfectly, reflecting it back onto her until she collapsed under its weight.
But let me argue the other side of this entirely.
Okay, go for it.
If aggression is so toxic, whether it's the overt dominance of a Rockefeller or the sneaky shadow war of a chronically late colleague, shouldn't we just repress it entirely? Be the ultimate pacifist?
That's a very common, very dangerous modern fallacy. The text warns that you cannot destroy fundamental human drives. You can only relocate them.
Because if you attempt to completely repress your natural assertive energy out of a desire to be good or peaceful, you create an internal saboteur.
Exactly. That blocked energy doesn't evaporate. It ferments.
Yeah.
It turns inward, manifesting as severe depression, self-loathing, and anxiety.
Or it leaks out sideways as the exact same toxic passive aggression we just analyzed.
You become the person who smiles to everyone's face, but secretly undermines them out of deeply repressed resentment.
So you don't slay the dragon.
You tame the dragon.
Yeah.
The text introduces the concept of controlled aggression. This is the alchemy of human potential.
It is taking that raw, primal, demanding energy of a toddler who screams for what they want, that pure, unyielding forward momentum, and refining it through the intellect.
Controlled aggression is persistence in the face of absolute failure. It is the fearlessness required to speak an unpopular truth in a boardroom.
It is the relentless, burning drive required to push through a massive creative block. When you are fighting a sophisticated aggressor, you need that aggressive fire to hold your boundaries.
It's the fuel of all human progress. You simply have to be the conscious architect steering the machine, rather than the impulsive animal reacting to it.
Harness the dragon, funnel it into your ostinato rigor, your relentless rigor. And that provides a perfect seamless bridge into Chapter 17, the law of generational myopia.
Because we use that controlled aggression to conquer our immediate environment. But the text suddenly pulls the camera back thousands of miles.
To reveal that we are all swimming in a massive invisible ocean that dictates our behavior without our consent. The tides of historical time.
The matrix of generations. This chapter is a direct assault on our modern ego.
We really do hold on to this fiercely protected narrative that we are completely independent, autonomous freethinkers.
We believe we rationally evaluated the world and independently chose our political affiliations, our moral frameworks, our aesthetic tastes, and our financial habits.
The text systematically dismantles this. It argues that a mass percentage of what you consider to be your unique personality is actually a deeply embedded program.
Installed by the specific 22-year block of time you happen to be born into.
So what does this all mean? Imagine history not as a straight upward line of logical progress, but as a giant pendulum.
I love the pendulum analogy.
You think you're choosing to walk to the left, but actually you're just standing on a pendulum that is violently swinging left as a reaction against the previous generation that swung too far right.
Sociologists call this collective memory, and the text explores it as a repeating, almost biological rhythm.
We form our foundational view of the world during our youth and early 20s.
Right. We look at the generation that raised us, we see their blind spots, their hypocrisies, the suffocating aspects of their culture, and we collectively, unconsciously vow to build a world that is the exact inverse of theirs.
And the text lays out an incredibly consistent 4-generation cycle to map this phenomenon. It always starts with a massive unifying trauma.
The crisis generation. This is a generation forged in the fires of a massive external threat.
Like a world war, a devastating economic depression, or a global pandemic.
Because their survival is threatened, they are forced to band together. They become highly cooperative, cautious, and focused on building strong, rigid institutions to protect themselves from the chaos.
This is the classic silent generation of the 1950s. The guys in the gray flannel suits, they survived World War II and the Depression, so they built a culture obsessed with safety, suburban conformity, and economic stability.
But then, they raise their children inside this perfectly sanitized, incredibly safe, highly structured environment.
And that next cohort, the revolutionary generation, looks around at this safety and finds it profoundly suffocating.
They don't remember the trauma that necessitated the rules. They only see the rules.
So they rebel. They prioritize radical self-expression, tearing down institutions, and seeking spiritual or emotional adventure.
The 1960s, the baby boomers exploding with color, psychedelics, and anti-war protests, they smashed the gray flannel suits.
Exactly. But a culture cannot survive purely on rebellion and dismantle institutions. Their revolution eventually creates social chaos, economic instability, and extreme narcissism.
So the next generation, the reactive generation, grows up amidst the debris of the revolution.
They look at their hippie parents and think, this is disorganized, self-indulgent nonsense. And the pendulum swings violently back. They crave order, pragmatism, and tangible success.
Enter the 1980s. Wall Street, shoulder pads, hypermaterialism, and aggressive corporate ambition.
It is an endless, violent reaction to the sins of the fathers. You think your generation is uniquely enlightened, but you are largely just a historical counterweight trying to balance the boat.
But the text doesn't just diagnose this trap. It provides the psychological tools to exploit it. It teaches you how to surf the zeitgeist.
The spirit of the times. And if you can cultivate the self-awareness to step outside your own generational myopia, you can actually observe the arc of the pendulum.
You can anticipate the unarticulated secret hungers of the public. Look at Josephine Baker and Jacqueline Kennedy. They gained massive power by perfectly embodying the shock of the new.
Josephine Baker in the 1920s is a flawless example. She arrived in Paris right after the mechanized, brutal slaughter of World War I.
The youth culture was profoundly traumatized and deeply cynical about the stiff, repressed Victorian morals of the older generation.
The generation that had marched them into the meat grinder of the trenches. They were desperate to feel alive again.
And Baker didn't just dance. She brought an explosion of raw, spontaneous, unapologetic physical energy. She became the living avatar of the Jazz Age's desire to cast off the old world.
And decades later, Jacqueline Kennedy performed a highly refined version of the same maneuver. She understood that the American public was growing fatigued by the grandmotherly, deeply predictable, frumpy aesthetic of the 1950s First Ladies.
The culture was quietly yearning for sophistication and forward momentum.
She introduced a sharp, youthful, almost European elegance to the White House. She didn't have to announce a new era. She visually manifested it, capturing the aspirational space-age spirit of the early 1960s.
But the most complex and fascinating strategy the text outlines is subverting the spirit. Working with the tide, not against it.
And this brings us to Coco Chanel. Because how do you hack the zeitgeist when you actually despise the direction the pendulum is swinging?
Chanel's post-World War II comeback is a masterclass in psychological adaptation.
Because after the war, American culture completely dominated the global market.
And Chanel, who was steeped in rigorous classic European sensibilities, privately abhorred the mass-produced, somewhat vulgar, highly casual nature of American fashion.
But she was a supreme realist. She knew that if she launched a crusade trying to force Americans back into restrictive, hyper-formal European gowns, she would be dismissed as a bitter relic of the past.
You cannot fight the ocean.
So she built a submarine. She analyzed the American market and realized that American women fundamentally wanted freedom of movement. They wanted athletic, unfussy clothes.
They wanted corsets. They wanted to drive cars and play golf.
So Chanel gave them the exact silhouette they craved. She embraced the casual, moving form, but she secretly injected her uncompromising European elegance into the invisible architecture of the clothing.
The exquisite tailoring, the luxurious jersey fabrics, the hidden weights in the hems.
She gave them what they wanted on the surface, but elevated their tastes from the inside out, entirely subverting the dominant culture to serve her own aesthetic vision.
It's brilliant, and to apply that to the listener today, if you are trapped in a corporate culture that values speed and volume over quality, and you value deep, meticulous work, you don't declare war on the culture.
You give them the speed they demand on the surface, but you build systems and frameworks that quietly enforce your standard of quality behind the scenes.
You subvert the spirit of your environment.
And the final piece of this generational puzzle is the imperative to keep adapting. As we age, our brains naturally lose neuroplasticity. We tend to freeze in the amber of our youth.
We listen to the same music, we hold the same rigid opinions, and we become caricatures of our generation complaining about the youth. The text uses Alfred Hitchcock as the antidote to this petrification.
Hitchcock was a director whose visual grammar was entirely forged in the silent film era of the 1920s in England.
By all historical logic, he should have become obsolete when sound and color revolutionized the industry.
But Hitchcock relentlessly observed the psychological shifts in the culture. He watched the pendulum swing.
When the 1950s and 60s ushered in a new era of psychological complexity and suburban paranoia, he updated his cinematic language.
He used the foundational skills of the 1920s to master the 1950s and 60s cinematic landscape. He terrorized entirely new generations with films like Psycho and Vertigo.
He refused to be temporally locked.
But let me push back, play the skeptic here. This entire chapter left me feeling a profound sense of existential claustrophobia.
Oh, so?
If my generation is just a knee-jerk reaction to my parents, and my children's generation will just be a knee-jerk reaction against me, are we just trapped in a biological, historical loop? How do we ever create anything truly timeless?
You remain trapped only as long as you remain blind to the mechanism. The text offers an escape velocity. developing the third eye.
Becoming the human beyond time.
Exactly. When you finally recognize the invisible programming of your generation, the programming begins to lose its absolute grip on your psyche.
You stop judging the older generation as out-of-touch dinosaurs, and you stop dismissing the younger generation as lazy, entitled kids.
You recognize they're just occupying different points on the pendulum. You begin to synthesize.
You extract the incredible work ethic and pragmatism of the older generation, and you fuse it with the technological fluidity and idealism of the youth.
You communicate with a deep past through a rigorous study of history, and you communicate with the unborn future through the lasting legacy of your work.
You transform from a reactive pendulum way into a bridge across time. You transcend the timeline.
But as the text masterfully and brutally pivots to in the final chapter, no matter how deeply you understand history, no matter how flawlessly you surf the zeitgeist,
There's one absolute, unavoidable brick wall that every single generation accelerates toward. The ultimate equalizer.
which brings us to Chapter 18, The Law of Death Denial, meditating on mortality. This is the grand finale concept.
The ultimate deadline. We spend our entire modern existence constructing elaborate psychological fortresses to hide from this reality.
We compartmentalize death. We sanitize it.
We hide the dying in sterile hospitals, we use euphemisms like passed away, we spend billions on anti-aging serums, and we obsess over youth culture. We treat death like an unfortunate optional glitch in the system.
And the text introduces a concept that turns this entire paradigm upside down, the paradoxical death effect.
Because we possess a deeply flawed psychological assumption that by ignoring death, we are protecting our happiness and reducing our anxiety.
But the text argues that the exact opposite is true. By repressing the reality of our mortality, we actually generate a pervasive, low-grade chronic anxiety that infects everything we do.
We become highly conservative. We stay in terrible jobs because we think we have infinite time to change later. We hold on to petty, decades-long grudges.
Ironically, by hiding from death, our daily routines become rigid, small, and profoundly death-like.
But confronting death, forcing yourself to stare directly into the unblinking eye of your own absolute end, does not depress you.
It acts as a massive psychological defibrillator. It makes you viscerally, electrically alive.
And the story the text uses to illustrate this, the life of the brilliant Southern Gothic author Flannery O'Connor, is staggering.
O'Connor's story is the ultimate manifestation of this law. In her mid-20s, at the very beginning of a highly promising literary career, she was diagnosed with lupus.
Which was the exact same agonizing, incurable autoimmune disease that had slowly killed her father.
Suddenly, the abstract concept of death was no longer abstract. It was a physical, palpable, daily presence inside her own bloodstream. She was given a severely limited, constantly ticking countdown.
Almost anyone else would have collapsed into a state of profound nihilism, bitterness, or total avoidance. They would have retreated from the world.
But O'Connor leaned into the void. The text notes that living in the constant shadow of her impending death cured her of the reality deficit that plagued every healthy person around her.
While her peers were sleepwalking through their days, complaining about trivial inconveniences, gossiping, and wasting time, she became intensely, vibrantly awake.
Knowing she only had a few years left, her empathy deepened exponentially. Her observational skills became razor-sharp.
She saw the absolute staggering beauty and tragedy of every single interaction, every conversation, every peacock wandering around her farm, because she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to lose it all.
Her writing became brilliant, urgent, and immortal because it was forged in the furnace of her own mortality.
Let me try to translate this into a modern cinematic analogy. Think about the clarity of a near-miss car crash, like a ticking timer in a high-stakes video game.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You're driving to work, you're stressed about an email, you're angry at your spouse over a completely trivial argument about the dishwasher.
And then a truck runs a red light and misses your driver's side door by 3 inches.
The adrenaline dumps into your system. For the next 10 minutes, with your heart pounding against your ribs, that argument about the dishwasher completely evaporates.
The stress about the email vanishes.
You pull over and you look at the trees and the colors seem impossibly bright. You just feel this overwhelming, vibrating gratitude simply to exist. Every single micro movement becomes dripping with purpose and intensity.
That is the clarity the text is demanding we cultivate without needing the truck. It is the ultimate filtering mechanism for human nonsense.
And the text provides a highly actionable philosophy of life through death to maintain that clarity. It starts with making the awareness visceral.
You cannot merely acknowledge death as a sterile intellectual statistic. You have to feel it in the fragile architecture of your own bones.
You have to look at your hand and recognize the incredibly temporary nature of the cells holding it together.
You have to routinely, intentionally visualize the world continuing on. The sun rising, the traffic moving, people laughing, in a world where you no longer exist.
Which brings us directly back to the very first thing we talked about today, the London Plague of 1665.
Yes. The text uses Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year to illustrate the second crucial step of this philosophy, seeing the mortality in everyone else.
Defoe's observations are haunting and deeply beautiful. When the bubonic plague began its march through London, it didn't care about the artificial human hierarchies.
It took the wealthy aristocrat in the mansion and the beggar in the gutter. It took the fundamentalist Protestant and the devout Catholic.
Confronted with the undeniable visceral reality of the death carts, the citizens of London experienced a radical psychological shift.
The illusion of their differences shattered.
They suddenly saw each other not as political rivals or economic competitors, but as profoundly fragile, suffering creatures sharing the exact same terrifying fate.
It generated a spontaneous, massive wave of universal empathy. Death was the great unifier.
If we could maintain just 10% of that plague-level awareness in our daily interactions, when a barista messes up our coffee or a coworker cuts us off in a meeting, imagine how our baseline level of grace and empathy would skyrocket.
It would completely change society.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. Isn't it profoundly clinically depressing to walk down a crowded street and constantly force yourself to think about the fact that every single smiling, breathing person you are looking at will be dead and buried in 90 years?
If you process that thought through the narrow, selfish lens of the ego, yes, it feels like despair. But the text elevates this toward the concept that the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate.
When you stop denying death, you stop wishing for life to be this frictionless, painless, endless fantasy.
You stop waiting for the perfect moment to start living. Amor fati means you embrace everything that happens to you with a fierce, joyful acceptance.
You embrace the devastating failures, the physical pain, the bitter rejections, and the moments of profound grief. Because the very fact that you possess a nervous system capable of feeling that pain means you are incredibly, improbably alive.
You are a temporary spark of consciousness in a vast, cold, dead universe. You love the fate you've been given, no matter how brutal, simply because you get to experience it at all.
It reframes pain as proof of life.
Exactly. And this culminates in the ultimate state of human awareness the text describes. The sublime.
The sublime. What is that exactly?
The sublime is standing at the very edge of the cliff, looking out into the unknowable dark mystery of death and the vastness of cosmic time, and allowing yourself to feel incredibly small.
When you let the sheer scale of the universe and the absolute certainty of your own end wash over you, it acts as a solvent.
It dissolves the petty, suffocating anxieties of your daily life.
Your stress over a missed promotion, the person who cut you off in traffic, the passive-aggressive email from a colleague, none of it can survive contact with the sublime.
You are left with nothing but pure, unadulterated awe and wonder.
Wow. Okay. That is the summit. Let's bring this all together and look at the view. We have traversed the absolute depths of the source material over 4 deep dives.
To the listener who's been on this journey, you are now holding the complete structural blueprints to the human machine.
You understand the hidden architecture. You know how to summon your inner rationality to master the chaotic storms of your own emotions, like Athena.
You know how to transmute toxic, blinding self-love into a deep, tactical, piercing empathy.
You know how to look past the carefully constructed masks people wear to judge their true underlying character.
You know how to navigate the impossible paradox of leadership, how to harness the dark energy of your own aggression, how to surf the invisible tides of generational time.
And now you know how to use the Reaper himself as the ultimate energizing motivator.
If we synthesize the entire thesis of this massive work, it is a profound warning and a profound promise.
The warning being that human nature is an ancient, dark, highly irrational force.
Exactly. If you remain asleep, if you refuse to do the work, this force will move you around the chessboard of life like a helpless pawn.
You will react blindly to your childhood wounds, you will conform mindlessly to your generation, and you will be manipulated by sophisticated aggressors.
But the promise is that through brutal, unflinching, courageous self-awareness, you can short-circuit the machine.
you can elevate your perspective. You can connect deeply with your fellow human beings, not by pretending we are all perfect, rational angels, but by accepting and forgiving our shared, deeply flawed, mortal nature.
You can awaken what the text calls the higher self.
Short-circuit the machine. So as we close this massive undertaking, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to chew on.
Go for it.
I want you to take that concept of the ticking timer, that near-miss car crash clarity, and apply it directly to your life the moment you take your headphones off. If you treated tomorrow as your absolute final day on Earth, which petty, exhausting grudge would you instantly drop?
That's a powerful question.
Which massive, terrifying risk would you finally find the courage to take? And who is the very first person you would call, not to argue with, not to vent to, but to truly, deeply, and silently listen to?
Thank you so much for going on this incredible 4-part journey into the depths of your own mind with us.
Yes, thank you. Take these blueprints and go build something timeless. We wish you the best of luck as an unleashed, fully aware human being.